All right, so welcome to St. Reed's, Jim Carrey's Fun and Funnier. This is for PewDiePie. This is for his charity Carrey. So I'll link his charity in the description below. But yeah, so enjoy. Buckle up. Here we go. Introduction, A Promise Kept. It was an early morning in 1985. Jim Carrey had just come off another late night shift at one of the LA comedy clubs. Usually, Jim just went home after a gig, but on this particular night, he swung his old Toyota toward Ritzy Mulholland Drive in Hollywood Hills. He parked his car, stared down at the city below, and allowed himself to drift off into a fantasy world in which he was one of the stars rich enough to live in the hills. Quote, some quotes. Jim had come to Los Angeles to make his professional dreams come true. Sure, he'd like being a stand-up comic. The sound of a live audience laughing at his impressions and jokes kept him charged up. But he imagined much more. He wanted to be an actor, and he didn't just plan on doing comedy films either. He wanted to try his hand at more serious fare as well. Someday, he hoped TV and movie audiences would learn to love him as much as the people who flocked to the comedy clubs to see him strut his stuff night after night. Sitting there in the early morning haze, Jim took out his checkbook and wrote a check for $10 million, payable to Jim Carrey, on Thanksgiving in 1995. The note in the memo read, "For acting services rendered." Jim stared at the post-dated check for a while before folding it carefully and tucking it in his wallet for safekeeping. Writing that check was a symbol for Jim's eternal optimism. At that time, Jim barely had $10,000 in his bank account, never mind $10 million. But he planned on making it big. He expected to be a star of major proportions, someday earning at least $10 million. Of course, the irony today is that Jim's actual success has overshot $10 million. Many times over, indeed. His usual salary now stands at $20 million per film. When was this written? The road to mega success has not been smooth for Jim Carrey. Over and over again, he has come up against roadblocks and failures that would have turned an ordinary man away from showbiz and into a life of selling insurance or something equally safe. But of course, good old Jim Carrey is no ordinary man. He's a fighter who has a deep belief in his own talent and a conviction that, in the end, his talent will win out. "It's always been my pattern," he told Entertainment Weekly. "I try something, totally suck, go away and come back, and then I kill." That's an understatement. In the past 10 years, Jim Carrey has starred in everything from innovative television in living color to record-breaking comedy films, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, Me, Myself, and Irene, to intense dramas that have allowed him to stretch his talents as an actor, The Truman Show, Man on the Moon, Kidding. Along the way, he's won 2 Golden Globe Awards and the hearts of millions. Still, Jim never did get too busy to buy himself that house on Mulholland Drive. Don't feel too bad for him. He now lives in a mansion in the ultra-chic Brentwood section of town. Oh, great, Brentwood. Awards, mansions, huge bank accounts. Not bad for a skinny Canadian kid who had to quit school to help his homeless family stay alive. Jim Carrey's life is a true rags to riches story. Not even the movies could make up a tale with this much drama. It can only happen in real life. In Jim Carrey's life. Alright, so that was the prologue. Riveting. Shall we go on? Chapter 1, A Chip Off the Old Block. James Eugene Carrey was born on January 17th, 1962 in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada, a small town about 30 miles outside of Toronto. By the time of Jim's arrival, there was already 3 other small Carreys in the household. Jim's older brother John and his 2 sisters Pat and Rita. Jim's dad, Percy, was a saxophone player who'd led a jazz band when he was a younger teenager. Jim's mom, Kathleen, known as Kay, had been a singer with the band. After they got married, Percy put down his sax and took up the respectable and responsible trade of bookkeeping. Kathleen worked as a hairdresser for a while, but she eventually traded in her scissors for motherhood. Although Percy left the showbiz behind when he got married, he still had the makings of an entertainer in his soul. He was a funny man who loved an audience. He was a major joke teller and a practical joker. No one, not even Percy's own family, was exempt from his endless stream of gags. One of his favorites was letting the kid's pet mouse loose from its cage just to watch Kathleen leap on a chair in fear. Percy adored making people laugh, and he loved when others would crack him up as well. It's part of the reason Percy was so partial to his younger son. Jim, as a baby, was funny. Sitting in his high chair, he would contort his face into all sorts of shapes when he didn't like the food that was put in front of him. The baby's crazy faces would send Percy into endless bouts of laughter. As he grew older, Jim continued to make faces. He'd stand in front of the mirror for hours, trying to mimic the facial expressions of his favorite actors. It would drive my mother crazy, Jim recalls. She used to try to scare me by saying that I was going to see the devil if I kept looking in the mirror. That fascinated me even more, of course. End quote. In fact, Jim was so happy making faces in the mirror that the usual childhood punishment of being sent to your room had no meaning for him. I always had too much fun up there, he laughs. To punish me, you had to send me out to play with other kids, end quote, according to his biography from the press kit for Jim's TV series, The Duck Factory, classic. Jim's first celebrity impersonation was of the late movie star John Wayne. Jim's dead-on impression of the man they called the Duke was especially remarkable, considering the fact that Jim was only 8 years old at the time. Percy's pride at his young son's talent for the mimicry was indescribable. Surprisingly, though, Jim credits his mom, and not his dad, with his ability to make people laugh. Kay spent much of Jim's childhood in bed, suffered from a series of illnesses. Looking back on it, Jim has told reporters that while some of Kay's illnesses were genuine, others were psychosomatic. Quote, "My mother was a professional sick person," he once said. "She took a lot of pain pills. There are many people like that. It's just how they are used to getting attention. I always remember that she's the daughter of alcoholics who would leave her alone at Christmas time." End quote. Jim spent countless hours trying to cheer up his bedridden mother. He put together whole comedy routines in which he did impressions of actors like John Wayne, Don Adams, and Frank Gorshin, who played the Riddler on TV's Batman. A sign of things to come. Sometimes Jim's little shows went on for almost an hour. Often Percy would join in, adding his unique brand of humor to the performance. Quote, "My father was really funny, and I guess it was a competitive sort of thing," Jim admits. If Percy was trying to boost his son's confidence, the plan must have worked. When Jim was 10 years old, he sent a resume-like letter to comedian Carol Burnett, who had a popular comedy variety show on the air at the time. Carol didn't hire the ambitious 10-year-old. Wonder if she'd sorry now? Who knows? When Jim was ready to start school, the Carrey family moved to Willowdale, Canada, another suburb of Toronto. Young James Eugene was the new kid in town, and he didn't have many friends. He was shy and so incredibly skinny that the other kids called him Jimmy Gene the String Bean. Wow, burn. So sad. But Jim soon discovered a wonderful way of winning them over. Quote, "I didn't have any friends until I started hammering it back at them." He always remembered his early days at Blessed Trinity Elementary. Quote, "I realized I could do something silly and make people laugh. Then they talked to me." One of Jim's early tricks was to chew up a whole handful of colorful candies and then pretend to get sick, spewing a rainbow of candy across the room. By second grade, Jim had developed quite a reputation as a class clown. Some teachers were frustrated by his wackiness. But Jim managed to find a way to charm them as well. He remembers one class in particular. Quote, "I was in a music class and they were practicing for the Christmas assembly. One day I started fooling around mocking the musicians on the record," he told Movie Line magazine. "The teacher thought she'd embarrass me by making me get up and do what I was doing in front of the whole class. So I went up and did it. She laughed and the whole class went nuts. My teacher asked me to do the routine for the Christmas assembly and I did." End quote. Jim's performance at the Christmas assembly was a huge success. From that moment on, he knew exactly what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. He wanted to be a performer. That assembly was the beginning of the end, he teases. But Jim's newfound popularity didn't last. While he was still in elementary school, the Carrey's family pulled up stakes and moved again, this time to Burlington, a town near Lake Ontario. Once again, Jim was the new kid, this time at St. Francis Xavier School. To make things worse, his mother made him like and take tap dancing. Oh no. Tapping his way through dance numbers was not exactly the macho image Jim longed for. Quote, "I spent a lot of time trying to hide my shoes from the other boys on the bus. Humiliation started early for me," Jim recalls only half-jokingly of his toe-tapping days. Sometime around 4th or 5th grade, Jim discovered that he had a learning disability called dyslexia. Dyslexia made it difficult for Jim to read, but he eventually learned to compensate for the problem with his phenomenal memory. Still having a learning disability and being a new kid who has also happened to look like a long, skinny string bean, callback, nice, was tough on Jim. Once again, he learned to compensate by joking his classmates into liking him. Quote, I didn't read that. Yeah, once again, he learned to compensate by joking his classmates into liking him. That's cool. Before long, the notes started coming from school. Many of the teachers at St. Francis Xavier didn't see Jim as funny. They found him disruptive. Kay tried to persuade her son to tone down the funny business, but as usual, Percy supported his son's desire to entertain, no matter where the stage. One of the teachers at St. Francis Xavier was Lucille Lucille, I don't know. Look it up. I don't know. Jim came into her class in 1974 and 1975. The two clicked almost immediately. Miss Dervatas was crazy about Jim's wild and wacky sense of humor, but she refused to put up with the wisecracks during learning time. Instead, she worked out a compromise that helped both Jim and herself. She told me that if I didn't fool around during class, I could have 15 minutes at the end of the day and do a comedy routine, Jim recalls, instead of bugging everybody. I'd figure out my routine, and at the end of the day, I'd go to perform in front of the entire class. I thought it was really smart of her. It's amazing how important that was. Performing for the kids in his class was a huge ego boost for Jim. The kids loved his act so much that they would beg for special permission for Jim to perform at other times of the day as well. But Miss Dervatas wasn't falling for it. Jim could perform at the end of the day, and that was all. Jim loved the sound of applause, and the more praise he got for his routine, the more he wanted to perform. In fact, with each end of the school day performance, Jim's desire to become a professional comic grew stronger. Unlike most teens, Jim Carrey already knew what he wanted to do when he grew up. So imagine his surprise when his dad suggested that maybe Jim wouldn't have to wait too long to fulfill his dream. Wow. Here we go. This is exciting. All right, chapter 2. You know what, before I move on, some coffee. All right. And actually, it's getting a little hot. Ooh. Chapter 2. Yuk Yikes. In 1976, Toronto got its first comedy club, Yuk Yuks Comedy Cabaret. Yuk Yuks wasn't really much of a club, just a long skinny room in a community center. But to Percy Carrey, Yuk Yuks was a dream come true, a place for his youngest son to show off his talents, and a spot for Percy to perform in front of an audience once again. It had been a lot of years since Percy had played with his jazz band, but he'd never lost the desire to get back on the stage. Now he had a chance to fulfill his own dream while helping his son take the first step to success. It wasn't hard for a comic to get booked at Yuk Yuks Comedy Cabaret. The club was open once a week. On the one night, there was a single professional performer who actually got paid. The rest of the evening was filled with amateur performers. Anyone who showed up got a chance at the microphone. When Jim was 14, Percy convinced him to try out one of his acts at Yuk Yuks. It didn't take a lot of persuading. After all, Jim figured that if his classmates thought he was funny, a room full of strangers would too. Besides, it was a chance to make his dad proud. Pleasing his parents was something Jim loved more than anything. Percy was so excited about Jim's debut that he spent hours working with Jim on a new act, while at the same time working on an act of his own. With Percy's support, Jim felt secure enough to walk into the club and get on stage. That's not something your average 14-year-old would do. But then again, Jim didn't come from your average family. I've got a lot of support from my parents, Jim remembers. That's the one thing I always appreciated. They didn't tell me I was being stupid when he did his impressions and made wild faces. They told me I was being funny, end quote. When the big night arrived, Percy and Jim went down to Yuk Yuks together. The father and son team sat in the back of the small basement club and waited impatiently for a chance to go on stage and perform some of their material. Finally, somebody passed the mic to Percy. Jim's fun-loving dad got on stage and told a bunch of slightly bawdy jokes to the crowd. He didn't get a whole lot of laughs, but he didn't get booed or heckled either. Too bad Jim couldn't claim the same honor. From the moment this skinny, nervous teenager took to the stage, the smell of disaster was in the air. Oof, it smells gross. The truth was, the jokes that made teenagers laugh, like the time Jim pulled his shirt over his knees and claimed he was Dolly Parton, didn't have any effect on a crowd of adults. Before long, the audience grew weary of Jim's wild antics and silly impressions. To them, he was just some goofy kid. Stand-up comedy is one of the toughest jobs in show business. Unlike theater, where audiences tend to live by a code that includes silence and attentiveness, comedy club audiences are always ready and willing to be part of the act. They have no problem booing a comic or badgering him with catcalls or worse. Because Jim had only performed for friends and families in the past, he'd never experienced anything but adoration. He was caught off guard when the audience heckled and booed him, and instead of using witty comebacks to counteract the audience's attack, Jim got goofier and goofier. The effect was just plain embarrassing. The memory of that night was embedded in Jim's brain. Years later, he recalled the terror he felt. Quote, "The owner of the club had this little thing that he liked to do when he would stand backstage and a microphone and heckle new comedians." Jim told the reporter, "So when I got up there and it was just horrendous, he was backstage going, 'Totally boring!' They were playing excerpts from Jesus Christ Superstar. Oof, like crucify him, crucify him. You know, when you go through that kind of experience, you kind of develop a thick skin. Damn, he was 14. That manager, Mark Breslin, would one day actually praise Jim for getting on stage that night. "Sure, he bombed, but just think what outrageous confidence it takes for a 14-year-old to think he could pull it off in the first place," he told the London Free Press years after Jim had gone on to become a successful comic. Jim, too, would one day be able to put a positive spin on matters. Failure is a relative term. There isn't failure unless you accept it, Jim told the same Free Press reporter. The ones who make it are the ones who just keep on going. But that's 20/20 hindsight. And at the time, Jim wasn't so clear-eyed and objective about his situation. In fact, he was convinced that the night at Yuk Yuks was the worst of his life. And up until that time, he was probably right. But unfortunately, a lot more bad luck was coming Jim's way. Whew! This is getting good. Still here? Good. That's the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3. We were gypsies. Less than a year after his disastrous debut, Jim and his family began a disturbing chapter in their lives that made the night at Yuk Yuks seem like a walk in the park. In 1977, Percy lost his job, and the Carreys found themselves in the middle of a financial nightmare, from which they felt they might never wake up. At first, the family made up with help from the kids. Pat had already gotten married and moved away, so that was one less mouth to feed. Rita took on babysitting assignments to earn grocery money. John also had a part-time job. Jim was still too young to work, but babysitting and part-time work wouldn't make that much money, and it didn't take long for the bills to start piling up. Creditors began knocking at the door of the Carrey house. It was time for the family to pull up the stakes and move on. Percy finally found a job as a night watchman at a factory. As part of the deal, Percy suggested his family be allowed to work nights at the plant too, in exchange for a place to live. Once the agreement was signed, Jim and his family moved into a farmhouse near the factory. While Percy guarded the factory, Jim, John, and Rita worked as janitors. It was horrible work, cleaning offices and bathrooms. Jim remembers being very angry. "I hated everyone and everything," he says. "When you're a kid, something like this makes you mad at the world," end quote. It also makes you tired. Unlike other kids in his 9th grade class, Jim was up working all night. The contract his father had signed included 8-hour shifts for all members of the Carrey family, except Kay, who was frequently too ill to work. Jim had no time for homework or for much sleep. He often got caught dozing off in class. The situation left Jim frustrated. "I was so angry I didn't want to hear it," he once told Newsweek. "I slept in class because I was working in the factory for 8 hours after school. I didn't have any friends because I didn't want them. I've gone through these periods as a child, as much adults haven't, where I look at these street guys and I know that could have been me. I know how they got there," end quote. Eventually Jim quit school. It wasn't doing him any good for just sitting too tired to absorb any information. The fact was, he could have been using the hours he spent in school helping to earn more money for his family. Had it been any other time in the Carrey family history, Kay and Percy might have objected to Jim's decision to drop out. But at the moment, every dollar helped. Percy and Kay agreed to allow 16-year-old Jim drop out of school. By the spring of 1978, Percy and Kay decided that their family could no longer work at the factory. Because they had lived on the company grounds, the Carreys were treated like indentured servants. They seemed to be on the call day and night. The pressure was destroying them. Once again, it was time to move on. So Kay and Percy piled the whole family into a yellow Volkswagen van and drove off. Jim, Rita, and John lived with their parents in the van for almost 8 months. For a while, they pitched a tent in Jim's sister's Pat's backyard, but mostly they just traveled around. Surprisingly, Jim doesn't remember life in the van with any bitterness or hostility. It was almost a relief after the drudgery of janitorial work. And there was the joy of being with his parents and 2 of his siblings. "We had problems like all families," he says, "but we had a lot of love. I was extremely loved. We always felt we had each other," end quote. Of course, this doesn't mean that Jim didn't recognize the absurdity of a whole family traveling around Canada in a Volkswagen van. Quote, "We were gypsies. It was weird," he admits. Eventually, the traveling had to come to an end. The Carreys parked their van outside of a small cottage in Jackson Point, about an hour from Toronto, and went off in search of work. Jim took a job at a picture framing shop. The other workers at the shop loved him. The manager of the shop, however, had less affectionate feelings for his new hire. Jim's daily comedy act was keeping people from working. Within 6 months, Jim was fired. For most people, being fired is an embarrassing, devastating experience. But in Jim's case, it was just the opposite. Being let go from his day job proved one thing. Jim was never going to succeed unless he followed his heart. And his heart wanted to be on stage. And so did the rest of his body, for that matter. He was going to have to get over the trauma he experienced at Yuk Yuks and get back to comedy. Wow. End of chapter 3. Moving on. Alright, chapter 4. Getting your act together. Now here's one for the getting back on the horse department. One of the earliest clubs Jim played when he first returned to stand-up comedy was Yuk Yuk's Comedy Cabaret. By 1978, when Jim was ready to hit the stage again, Yuk Yuk was bigger, more famous. It was no longer located in a community center. It was a full-fledged nightclub in an upscale part of Toronto, and Yuk Yuks had already launched its first star, Howie Mandel. The comedian who went on to exercise his acting chops on TV celebrated Saint Elsewhere. Fan of gloves. Naturally, the club had taken on a much more professional air as its reputation grew. Amateur comics were regulated to a late-night slot. After the professional headliners had played to the biggest audiences, beginners had to pay their dues by giving plenty of well-received performances before graduating to paid performance status. Looking back, it's kind of amazing that Jim would go back to Yuk Yuks of all places to make his return to nightclub work. To this day, even Jim isn't quite sure how he found the courage to walk back onto that stage, to do a newly refined act consisting of impressions, pratfalls, mugging, and physical comedy, rivaled only by circus contortionists. Quote, "I have no idea what motivated me to try again," he admits in interviews. "I felt like giving it a shot. Failure taught me that failure isn't the end unless you give up," end quote. Excuse me. Certainly Jim was a different kind of comic at Yuk Yuks. Most of the performers were into social commentary and political humor, real highbrow stuff, something that no one has ever accused Jim of. He wasn't the intellectual humor type. He just wanted to make people laugh. "I'd go on stage with spiked hair and big red pants and just go off," Jim recalls. Improvisation. Many of the jokes Jim told were related to the recent experiences he and his family had lived through. One of the favorites was about a time he asked his dad if the family was poor. The punchline said it all. "No, son. We're rich as long as we have each other. Now get to the dumpster." Only a comic genius could turn misery into a great stand-up routine. To some of the folks who hung out at Yuk Yuks in 1978, Jim was reminiscent of another young comic who was making it big in the States, Robin Williams. Many people thought Jim had the same sort of wild improvisational skills and spirit that Robin did. And like Robin, Jim had the kind of physical stamina that is usually reserved for Olympic athletes. He was like the Energizer Bunny. He'd keep going and going as long as the audience would listen. It didn't take long for Jim to progress to the professional level at Yuk Yuks. The money wasn't great, but it was something, and at least Jim was earning cash doing a job he loved for a change. Eventually, Jim moved on to other clubs in Canada, like Stitches in Montreal, and Giggles, another Toronto club. Jim's dad, Percy, was there for his son's every step, acting as his manager and taking a seat in the audience. Proudly leading the laughter during each show, Jim's popularity continued to grow, and eventually he found himself headlining at Canadian clubs, sometimes earning upwards of $1,000 a night. As his following grew, Jim came to the attention of a local agent who booked commercials for radio and TV in 1981. Jim got his first shot at acting, playing a bad comic on an after-school special called Introducing Janet. Oh my god. The hour-long drama explored the relationship between Jim's character, Tony, and Janet, played by Adele Glasswalk, I think. Look it up. A chubby girl with a pushy mother who has a big problem with low self-esteem. In the film, Jim actually has to do bad impressions of Groucho Marx and Henry Winkler's Fonzie character from the TV show Happy Days. Jim wanted to make sure that people who were not already acquainted with his work realized he was only acting in the film. He assured Canadian TV Guide that the Fonz impression was not his idea. "Wasn't that horrible?" he asked a reporter. "They wrote it. I would never write anything like that. It's ghastly." End quote. As the title of the movie suggests, Jim was hardly the star of Introducing Janet, and playing a comedian with little talent and worse timing didn't exactly give him a forum for bringing new audiences into the clubs he sees at his act. Still, Jim was glad for the opportunity to take his career to a new level and to stretch himself as a performer. But even with the TV movie to his credit, Jim was still primarily a comic. The clubs were his bread and butter. So, in the spring of 1981, Jim leaped at the chance to fly south of the border to New York City to work his maniacal magic on audiences in the Big Apple. One of the biggest stops Jim made on his whirlwind tour of New York was at Dangerfield's, the comedy club owned by comic legend Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney had won fame in early 1960s when he appeared on the Ed Sutherland Show and managed to make the usually stone-faced Ed laugh. He had gone on to become well known for his "I don't get no respect" routine. Rodney's No Respect album even won a Grammy for Best Comedy Album in 1980. As luck would have it, the comic legend just happened to be visiting his club on the night Jim Carrey performed there. Rodney was fascinated by Jim's brand of comedy. He could see that the kid had real talent, even if no one else in the club that night seemed to recognize it. Rodney would watch me from the wings, quote, standing there in the house coat. I'd come off stage and he'd take a drag of his cigarette, shake his head and say, "They were looking at you like you was from another planet, kid," Jim recalled years later. But Rodney was determined to have Jim's rather unusual comedy seen. He stayed in touch with Jim and arranged for him to be his opening act when Rodney played Canada. Having Rodney Dangerfield's stamp of approval was a big deal. People respected Rodney and valued his judgment about other comics. Before long, big clubs across America were clamoring for Carrey. In the fall of 1981, Jim took his act on the road to the mecca of stand-up comedy, Los Angeles. Wow, we're rolling through it. End of chapter 4. All right. Chapter 5. California, here he comes. In the early 1980s, Los Angeles was the place all young comedians dreamed of playing. Not only did the clubs pay well, but it seemed that every night, hot spots like the Improv and the Comedy Store were packed with network executives looking for comics to appear on variety shows or to take on a comedic role in a pilot that was already in development. Getting his own TV show was every comic's dream. Jim was no exception. He loved playing clubs, but his goals were higher. On his first trip to Los Angeles, Jim stopped to look at the handprints and footprints in front of a man's Chinese theater. As Jim studied the names of the stars printed in the cement, he vowed that someday he too would be famous enough to have his handprints on the sidewalk of fame. His prediction didn't come true. Just kidding. But it took almost 15 years. Jim added his handprints to the walk outside Mann's Chinese Theater in 1995. Jim's first trip to LA was highlighted by a successful stint at the Improv. Although he didn't receive any firm offers, Jim did come to the attention of several casting agents, including some people from The Tonight Show. The producers of that late night show liked Jim's work a lot, but felt that he needed a little more polish and fewer dirty jokes before he would be ready to perform on the same stage with Johnny Carson, who was The Tonight Show's host before Jay Leno took over. Jim left LA at the end of 1981 to do a televised New Year's Eve show for Canadian TV, but the City of Angels had already begun to feel like home. Eventually, Jim found himself spending so much time in LA that he had to take a room in a house in West Hollywood. His housemates were other aspiring performers who, like Jim, spent a great deal of time on the road. Jim spent his LA nights playing clubs and honing his act. During the day, he took acting classes and auditioned for commercials, movies, and TV shows. Jim's hard work eventually paid off. In the spring of 1982. He was offered a role in the TV movie Copper Mountain. He played Bob, a shy guy who starts to do impressions whenever he gets nervous talking to girls. There wasn't much of a script to Copper Mountain, and nobody on the set of the TV movie had any delusions that they were doing Hamlet. Still, the movie shoot did offer Jim a chance to learn to ski and to spend time at a Club Med resort. Wow, good for Jim. He also got to meet famed rockers Rita Coolidge and Ronnie Hawkins, both of whom provided songs for the film soundtrack. Jim tried his best to learn what he could from experienced actors like Alan Thicke, who played a fellow guest at the Copper Mountain Resort, but Jim had to admit that the 13-hour days often got to him. He also had a hard time getting used to the long waits between scenes. Quote, "I get so anxious when I have to wait," he explained to a reporter at the time. "On stage is really where I get my kicks. Being live on stage is the best feeling in the world." Of course, as everyone knows, Jim did eventually learn. to become more patient and comfortable on movie sets. But his love of live performing has never left him. Today, he expresses it by mugging for the paparazzi's cameras or goofing around with the crews on his movies. By the end of 1982, Jim had decided that if his career was going to go anywhere, he would have to live in Los Angeles full-time. In January of 1983, he moved permanently to LA and became a full-fledged member of the comic community. As such, there was one place he really wanted to play: the Comedy Store. The Comedy Store was run by Mitzi Shore, a powerful woman in the stand-up business. She built the Comedy Store into a major power in Hollywood. Many of the comics went on to careers in TV and film or veterans of her stage. So having Mitzi in their corner was extremely important for young comics. Luckily, Mitzi joined Jim, and she liked him. He was one of her favorites. She found him fresh and exciting, not to mention always respectful of her position as owner of the Comedy Store. Whenever there was a talent scout in the audience, Mitzi made sure Jim was on the bill. Mitzi Shore wasn't Jim's only influence during his early Los Angeles days. He also found a great teacher and cohort in a loud, edgy comic named Sam Kinison. Sam and Jim were truly comedy's odd couple. Jim was long and lean and had an act that was based on impressions and physical humor. Sam was small and chunky. His act was filled with loud, shocking screams and raunchy jokes. But the two men hit it off and remained close friends until Sam's untimely death in a car accident in 1992. Under Sam's influence, Jim slowly began to move away from doing impressions. He told a reporter for the Free Press, "There's going to come a time when just doing impressions won't be enough. I want to do everything." End quote. In 1983, singer Linda Ronstadt, sorry Rhonda, I mean Linda, came to the Comedy Store to catch Jim's act. One of her backup singers had recommended that Linda check him out. She liked what she saw and asked Jim to be the opening act during her upcoming tour. It was an amazing opportunity. Before he knew it, Jim was on the road with Linda. Despite their age difference, Jim was 21 and Linda was 37, the attraction between the cute comic and the rock diva was powerful. They began a romance during Linda's 1983 tour. The relationship continued after the tour ended, and Jim began spending more and more time living in luxury at Linda's mansion in Brentwood. Waking up in a mansion was a far cry from the Volkswagen van Jim and his family had shared during his teenage years in Canada. Jim knew he could get used to living a life of wealth and privilege. But getting there wasn't going to be easy. Jim knew that Linda's money came from years and years of hard work. She'd been a major star throughout the 1970s, and her career was still going strong in 1980. She toured endlessly and continued to record albums. If Jim wanted to live the way Linda did, he would have to work equally hard and equally long. But that didn't scare him. He certainly wasn't afraid of hard work. Nothing would ever seem hard after being a janitor in a factory. Besides, performing was fun. It was more like play than work. In 1983, Jim left Linda's side and headed to Calgary in Alberta, Canada, to shoot a movie called Finders Keepers. Jim was excited about the film because it was based on a fine novel by Charles Dennis called The Next to Last Train Ride. Even more exciting was the prospect of working with famed British filmmaker Richard Lester, who directed The Beatles in both A Hard Day's Night and Help. Jim only had a small role in the wacky train chase extravaganza, but he used his time on the set well, learning as much as he could about filmmaking by watching Richard Lester at work. Jim had high hopes that Finders Keepers would catapult him to a new level in Hollywood, but when the movie tanked at the box office, it became clear that wasn't going to be Jim's ticket to success. Jim didn't have much time to be depressed about the poor box office reaction to the film. However, a new opportunity soon appeared. Jim was offered the leading role in a situation comedy that was guaranteed to air in prime time on the NBC television. Soon, Jim would be entering the homes of Americans on a weekly basis. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Wow, end of chapter 5. Whoa! Here we go, chapter 6, Duck. Jim's new television series, The Duck Factory, seemed like a guaranteed hit. This sitcom about a young cartoonist was created by Alan Burns, who along with James L. Brooks had come up with the idea for the Mary Tyler Moore Show, a 1970s mega success. Allen had also been one of the creators of the groundbreaking Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in the 1960s. When it came to quality comedy television, Allen Brooks was the man. Jim was offered 5,000 episodes to play Skip Tarkenton, a cartoonist from the Midwest who moved to Los Angeles to take on his first job at an animation factory, working on the Dippy Duck Show. Sweet. The premise was great, but Jim was miscast. Skip was a straight man of the show, surrounded by wacky characters, in much the same way that Mary Tyler Moore was the voice of sanity among her crazy cohorts on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Jim wasn't given a chance to really show off his comedic ability. Years later, Alan Burns would admit that he had wasted Jim's considerable talent. Wow. Had I understood Jim's incredible qualities earlier, I would have reshaped the character rather than forcing him to fit something that would have conceived it before he came along. I don't know what he sounds like. It's perfect. He told one reporter, "It was unfortunate, yeah, but by the time he cast him, there wasn't time to recreate the character." Jim shared his newly found good fortune with his parents, asking Percy and Kay to live in the extra bedroom of the small bungalow he purchased in North Hollywood. Jim's mom and dad lived there for several months, basking in their son's burgeoning celebrity. Eventually, though, they had returned to their native Canada, which would always be home to them. Part of the premise of the show was that the make-believe Dippy Duck Show was always in danger of being canceled. Ironically, almost from its inception, the Duck Factory found itself in the same mess. From the moment it entered the NBC lineup as a mid-season replacement in April 1984, there were problems. The show was sandwiched in a Thursday night spot between Cheers, a comedy that took place in a bar, and Hill Street Blues, a one-hour police drama. Both shows were huge hits for the network, but they were already in late-season reruns when the Duck Factory premiered. That made getting huge ratings almost an impossibility. After just 13 episodes, the NBC pulled the plug on the Duck Factory. Jim was disappointed when he had heard that the show was canceled, but he wasn't totally surprised or brokenhearted by the network's decision. Quote, "I suppose I'd be upset if I was 40 and my series was dying," the 22-year-old Jim told Noel Gallagher of the London Free Press. "But it's too early in my career to worry. Besides, I believe that things, good or bad, are meant to happen." End quote. There were more bad things in store for Jim. On top of the failure of Finders Keepers and the demise of the Duck Factory, Jim's love life was a mess. Jim and Linda had broken up in December of 1983 while he was working on the Duck Factory. That was a mutual decision. Linda eventually went on to date Star Wars creator George Lucas, and Jim told friends he was happy to no longer be known in certain circles merely as Linda Ronstadt's boyfriend. By the summer of 1984, Jim found himself without a steady paycheck or a steady girlfriend. It was obvious that change was in the air. The only question was, which way would it blow? End of chapter 6. Wow. Moving on. Chapter 7. Movies, Mayhem, and Marriage. After the cancellation of the Duck Factory, Jim took to the road, performing in New Orleans and Las Vegas with veteran mimic Rich Little. This was an honor for Jim. Rich Little was the king of impersonators at that time, and his desire to perform with Jim was an invitation to an elite club. But Jim had already decided that was one club he didn't want to join. Jim just couldn't see himself imitating movie stars on the Vegas stage for the rest of his life. It suddenly occurred to Jim that he didn't want to impersonate celebrities. He wanted to be a celebrity. And to fill that dream, he was going to have to develop a different kind of comedic style. Something daring and exciting that would set him apart from every other comic who had come before him. He wanted to try things that had more bite. If bite was what Jim wanted, he certainly got his wish in mid-1984 when he was offered a co-starring role opposite model Lauren Hutton in the vampire comedy Once Bitten. The movie was a switch on typical vampire flicks in that the vampire was a woman. Lauren's character was known simply as the Countess. Jim played a high school student named Mark who was her spouse of virgin blood. The Countess had to bite Mark's thigh 3 times in order to keep her youth and immortality. With each bite, Jim's character became more and more vampire-like. The bizarre changes in Mark's behavior, like a sudden need to scarf down huge amounts of blood and red raw meat, gave Jim a chance to show off his comedic talent in a few scenes. Although Jim was once again stuck in a constraining good guy role, a few comedic sparks predicted the wacky physical humor that was to surface in Jim's later flicks. Jim followed up his performance in Once Bitten with a small role in a romantic comedy called Peggy Sue Got Married. The film starred Kathleen Turner and Nicolas Cage as a married couple who had been together since high school. In the film, 43-year-old Peggy Sue, Kathleen Turner, travels back in time to her senior year in high school to decide whether to marry Charlie, Nicolas Cage, her childhood sweetheart. Jim played Walter Getz, Charlie's best friend. Like almost all of the characters in the film, Jim got to play Walter both in high school during the late 50s and as an adult in the 1980s. But his screen time was so short that he was barely noticed at all. Unfortunately, fans will never get to see Jim's best work during Peggy Sue Got Married. That took place behind the cameras, when Jim entertained the cast and crew with bits from his stand-up routine. He was a popular member of the cast, despite the fact that his name was rarely on the call sheet. His behind-the-scene antics may not have made Jim a star, but they did earn a new friend in Nicolas Cage. To this day, the two men are close pals. After working on Peggy Sue Got Married, Jim had no more film projects lined up, so he returned to Mitzi Shore's fold, once again taking the stage at the Comedy Store. Upon his return, Jim discovered that Mitzi had hired a new waitress, an aspiring actress named Melissa Wolmer, whose blonde good looks attracted Jim almost immediately. Melissa was a big change from Jim's previous girlfriend Linda, but that was fine with Jim. His whole life was in flux at the time. He was busy redefining himself as a comedian, slowly dropping the impressions from his act and slipping into more bizarre bits like hiding himself inside a piano, just to see how the crowd would react. And while the crowd didn't always seem to get Jim's offbeat humor, Melissa did. That drew the two of them closer. On March 28, 1987, Jim and Melissa made their special bond official during an outdoor wedding ceremony in Santa Monica, California. As the sun set on his wedding day, Jim felt incredibly positive. He had a feeling that marrying Melissa was just the beginning of a wonderful new period in his life. We're done with chapter 7 already? End of chapter 7. Chapter 8. Oh, baby. And baby makes 3. In September of 1988, Jim and Melissa welcomed a baby girl named Jane to their tight-knit family. Jim had goofed around about a lot of things, but he took fatherhood extremely seriously. He'd grown up in an incredibly supportive household despite the financial turmoil that had often surrounded the family. Jim was determined to give Jane the same love he received as a child. He was like a totally hands-on dad, diapers and all. It didn't take much to make Jim happy in those days. Just being able to make his child laugh brought a smile to Jim's face. And since Jim had never had a trouble making folks laugh, there was a lot of joy in the Jim Carrey household. Some people say that babies bring luck. And in Jim's case, Jane definitely was a rabbit's foot, a 4-leaf clover, and a heads-up penny, all rolled into one. Not long after her birth, Jim took on a small role in the Deadpool, the 5th film in Clint Eastwood's spectacularly Dirty Harry series. The part of Johnny Shakes was tailor-made for Jim's wacky and sometimes wicked sense of humor. Johnny Shakes is a leather-clad, spiked-haired, drug-addicted, egomaniac, maniacal rock singer who is in the midst of making a hardcore rock and roll video. Both Clint and the film's director, Buddy Van Horn, agreed to let Jim take the character in any direction he wanted. It was a dangerous deal, considering Jim's sometimes over-the-top humor. Even back then, Jim had a strong sense of what would and wouldn't work on film. He managed to make Johnny Shakes a caricature of hard rock singers without turning the character into a cartoon. Johnny Shakes dies, spoilers, early in the Deadpool, but Jim managed to make his mark both on and off the screen. Clint Eastwood was so impressed by Jim's performance that he hired him again to play a cameo role in the next film, Pink Cadillac. Although neither role was a star-making turn, Jim had found himself a good friend in Clint Eastwood. And let's face it, in Hollywood, Clint's the kind of friend you want to have around. Years later, in 1996, Jim would repay the favor by emceeing the televised ceremony in which Clint received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Film Institute. Good job, Clint. Jim's excitement at becoming part of Clint Eastwood's distinguished circle of friends was tempered by the sad knowledge that Carrey hadn't lived long enough to share his thrill ride to success. Jim's mom died in October of 1989 at the age of 61. Losing his mom at such a young age was painful, but like any good comic, Jim put on a happy face and moved on toward the next project. He was on a roll, and he knew it. So when he read the completely whacked out script for a sci-fi musical comedy called Earth Girls Are Easy, he jumped at the chance to be part of the team. Jim was crazy about the idea of playing a space alien, the part of Whiplock. Alien number 2 was perfect for him. After all, Rodney Dangerfield had said all along that audiences looked at Jim as if he was from another planet. There was another benefit to taking on the part of Alien 2 in Earth Girls Are Easy. He got to work with Alien number 1 and number 3. Jeff Goldblum was the first alien, and Damon Wayans was cast as number 3. Damon and Jim became close friends. Both men saw themselves as comic renegades, always interested in pushing the envelope just a little further. While Jim and Jeff and Damon were busy conquering the Earth, the movie multiplexes, Damon's brother Keenan was busy creating a series for the newly formed Fox network. It was a sketch comedy show that would take TV audiences in a direction that they'd never gone before. Keenan Ivory Wayans wanted the show to be hot, hip, and more than a little off the wall. He envisioned it as a kind of renegade series with a primarily African-American cast. But when Damon Wayans suggested that Jim meet with Keenan to talk about the show, Jim wasn't very excited at the prospect. Since his quick quack with the Duck Factory, he was less than confident about being part of a TV show. But after auditioning for Keenan and other producers of what would eventually be called In Living Color, Jim changed his mind. He could tell that the Wayans brothers had the same silly, some might say sick, take on the world as he did. And so when In Living Color hit the airwaves in 1990, April 15th, Jim Carrey was there, adding to the merriment and the mayhem. Alright, sweet. End of chapter 8. Here let's go. Let's keep going. Okay, chapter 9. Making it big on the small screen. Jim was right, in his element, with the folks who took part in the weekly laugh fest that was In Living Color. The show's ensemble cast included several Wayans family members, Keenan, Damon, and their sister Kim, as well as Tommy Davidson, David Allen Greer, and TK Ma. All the cast members had their own talent for creating wildly fascinating characters and for doing dead-on impressions of famous actors. In Living Color was the perfect format for Jim's sense of humor. Once again, he was able to do impressions. Only this time he could imitate more recent performers and put even more bite into his routines, doing things like turning Vanilla Ice into a psychotic, spike-haired weirdo. Good job, Jim. Jim was also given carte blanche to come up with original characters all his own. Perhaps his most famous character from In Living Color was Fire Marshal Bill, a burned and disfigured pyromaniac who became more and more grossly injured each time he told the audience, "Let me show you something." Despite the character's popularity, Fire Marshal Bill was eventually banished by Fox because the network executives were afraid he was encouraging kids to play with fire. Jim loved coming up with new characters. Often they came from the chance encounters with people Jim met on the street, in the store, or at the gym. Quote, "Sometimes a character begins with a spark of somebody's personality," he told reporters at the time. "Then I just pull it, stretch it, and take it as far as I can. It's about getting the laughs," end quote. And In Living Color was an instant success. Critics raved about its lowbrow, high-talent humor combination. Newsweek magazine commented that so far the ratings indicate yet another triumph for TV's most audacious network. Among the with it young, this weekly satirical review is fast becoming Saturday night's hottest party ticket. In 1989 and 1990, In Living Color received an Emmy Award for Outstanding Variety Musical or Comedy Series, and an award for the NAACP. The following year, it received the People's Choice Award for Favorite New Television Comedy Series and the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Award for Favorite TV Show. It tied with The Simpsons. By 1992, In Living Color's popularity had soared so high that Fox had the cast perform live along with Color Me Badd during the halftime show at the Super Bowl. Jim was thrilled with the accolades and fame that came with being one of In Living Color's regulars. It was like being paid to play, and his newfound popularity made him a hot commodity. Showtime television approached him about doing a special for the cable network. In the middle of the second season, Jim polished up his stage act and headed back up to Canada, where he performed at the Theatre Passe Morali? I'm sorry, Canada, in Toronto. The whole show was taped for broadcast on Showtime. Jim's stand-up routine was filled with more overtly sexual references than anything he did on In Living Color. That's the lure of cable. Far fewer restrictions are imposed by nervous network censors. He also joked about his parents and his upbringing, and did several of his choicest celebrity impressions. The special, entitled Jim Carrey's Unnatural Act, was broadcast throughout November of 1991. But the reviews and ratings were a disappointment to both Jim and Showtime, and the network quickly pulled the special from its schedule. Jim didn't let the disappointment bring him down. He simply poured himself back into his work, In Living Color, and let the cheers buoy up his spirits. Okay. But deep down, Jim knew that In Living Color couldn't last forever. And if he wanted to have a long-lasting career, he'd have to do something more than imitate psychotic pyromaniacs and presidential hopefuls like Ross Perot. Quote, "To me, it's the saddest thing in the world to see a comedian at 60 doing the same characters in the same act," end quote, Jim told Time magazine. To keep from becoming one of those sad old comedians, Jim decided to exercise his acting chops during the 1992 hiatus from In Living Color. He took on a role in a serious TV movie called Doing Time on Maple Drive. Jim played Tim, a 20-something alcoholic who is tired of living under the demanding rules of his ex-military man dad. Jim was handpicked for the role by the movie's director, Ken Olin, best known for portraying Michael Stedman on the melodrama series 30-something. At the time, Ken admitted to reporters that he wasn't familiar with Jim's work on In Living Color. He was simply blown away by his honest, understated reading at his audition. Jim's character in Doing Time on Maple Drive was carrying around a lot of emotional baggage. He was constantly being criticized by his dad, who would make stinging remarks like, "Every time I look at you, I think, God, I have another son." The father-son relationship in the movie bore little resemblance to Jim's relationship with the lavishly supportive Percy Carrey, but Jim was still able to draw up enough pain and emotion to make Tim's reactions to his dad's verbal slaps seem real. His portrayal of with a gift of mimicry, his portrayal of Tim proved that Jim was more than just a comedian with a gift of mimicry and wacky physical shtick. He was an actor with a true artist's soul. To this day, many critics think that Jim did some of his best work in Doing Time on Maple Drive. A reviewer of WLWT Cincinnati said of Jim's work that there's no gags or no props, just fine acting. After the seriousness of Maple Drive set, Jim returned to In Living Color, ready to go wild. Stretching himself was fine and challenging, but for the time being, the controlled anarchy of In Living Color felt like home. End of chapter 9. Oh my god. Why am I doing this? Whoa, it got dark out. It went in, trust me. Ugh. Back to work, chapter 10. Jim's pet project. In 1994, Jim was still happily skewering celebrities and society on In Living Color when the folks at Morgan Creek Productions came to him with an idea for a movie about a detective who specializes in cases involving animals. Jim hadn't been seen on the big screen in almost 5 years. Since Earth Girls Are Easy, and yet he was reluctant to do the movie, the problem was simple. He liked the film's premise, but hated the script. Finally, Jim and the producers came to an understanding. Jim could make changes in the script if he agreed to the star in the film. That was the guarantee that Jim needed. He signed on and began, oh god, I am losing it. He signed on and began rewriting the movie almost immediately, keeping nothing but the initial premise. Detective Ace Ventura goes in search of a missing Miami Dolphins mascot. Other than that, all the new jokes and gags were pure Jim Carrey. Jim was paid $350,000 to write and act in the film. In the spring of 1993, Jim flew down to Miami to begin filming Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. He had a blast, keeping the cast and crew laughing with his off-screen antics. As funny as the movie turned out to be, people who were there during the filming agreed that Jim's best bits again took place off-camera. Jim's silly, grinning bear behavior masked a real problem in his life, however. By the time Ace Ventura wrapped, Jim and Melissa had officially separated. Jim took responsibility for the split. He admitted that success had indeed gone to his head, and that he'd been tough to live with. Quote, "Living with me these past couple of years has been like living with an astronaut," Jim confessed to a magazine. "It's like I just came back from the moon. Don't ask me to take out the garbage." End quote. Jim's separation from Melissa was anything but simple. There was a lot of wrangling over money, but the one thing neither parent argued about was how to deal with Jane. Jim and Melissa agreed to share custody of their younger daughter. Ace Ventura: Pet Detective was scheduled to be released in February of 1994. Jim was extremely anxious about how the movie would be received. He knew it was different from anything that anyone else was doing. But was that a good thing or a bad thing? Only time would tell. Quote, "This is the kind of thing where either they love me or hate me," Jim told a magazine during a whirlwind promotional tour leading up to the release of the film. In the end, the fans loved him and the critics hated him. And that was okay with Jim. By the second weekend, the film had grossed more than $25 million. He didn't need to be critics' darling. Just seeing the box office receipts building higher and higher let him know that he had his finger on the average moviegoer's pulse. His audience liked things a little raunchy and lowbrow. Slapstick humor was the way to go. As for the critics, Jim told Newsweek that their opinions didn't mean much. "I just think, would I want to go see a movie with those guys in it?" End quote. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11, Putting on the Mask. Jim's follow-up to Ace Ventura was an ambitious endeavor, bringing a comic book character to life. The leading role in The Mask was perfect for Jim. After all, many people considered him a human cartoon anyway. Jim was paid $450,000 to play a Jekyll and Hyde character in The Mask. For part of the film, he was mild-mannered Stanley Ipkiss, a kind of human doormat who lets everyone step on him and take advantage of his weaknesses. But the moment Stanley finds an old Viking mask, the movie changes. He becomes The Mask, a green-faced wild man who sings and dances his way through life in a yellow zoot suit and a huge fedora. The many special effects in The Mask were provided by the famed Industrial Light and Magic company. The ILM technicians searched their bag of special effects tricks and found ways to make Jim's eyeballs pop out of their sockets and his heart leap out of his chest. At first, Jim worried that the effects would overshadow his performance, but he needn't have been concerned. When The Mask, co-starring Cameron Diaz, was released, everyone knew who the real star of the film was. No matter what effects the ILM people created, critics and fans agreed that the film's best special effect was Jim. As Richard Corliss reported for Time magazine,
"Harry doesn't need any cybernetics or silicon to rubberize his limbs. He's his own special effect, the first star who was a live-action toon."
End quote. When The Mask shot to the #1 spot in the summer of 1994, Jim was battling 2 for 2. He was now a full-fledged star, and his earnings reflected his status. Jim received $7 million to star in his next comedy, Dumb and Dumber. To take on the supporting role of the Riddler in Batman Forever, he was paid $5 million, plus a percentage of the profits from toys based on his character. Getting the part of the Riddler was a big deal for Jim, even without the bucks. At the time, everyone thought the part would go to Robin Williams. In fact, Robin was in the middle of negotiations with the producers when they switched gears and offered the role to Jim. All of Hollywood was shocked, but no one was more surprised than Jim, who was in France, promoting The Mask at the Cannes Film Festival. When he received the call, he said, "When I got the call in Cannes, they wanted me, I just couldn't believe it," Jim recalls. But before he could go to Gotham City to become the Riddler, Jim had to travel to Colorado to begin shooting Dumb and Dumber. Jim had a great on-screen partner in Dumb and Dumber. Jim played Lloyd, a really dumb limo driver, while Jeff Daniels played his buddy Harry, who's even dumber than Lloyd. Dumb and Dumber. Get it? I don't. Jim's on-screen chemistry with Jeff Daniels was indisputable, but it was Jim's off-screen chemistry with actress Lauren Holly that made headlines. Lauren Holly, a beautiful blonde who starred on Picket Fences in the soap opera All My Children, had been cast as a mysterious woman who rides in Lloyd's limo and leaves behind a package. When Lloyd and Harry decide to deliver the package to her, the fun really begins. Everyone on set of Dumb and Dumber could see that Jim and Lauren were attracted to each other. They were made for each other, writer and director Peter Farrelly quoted. Charles Rocket, who played Nicholas Andre, agreed, telling the magazine that they're like a couple of kids at the beginning of a relationship, goofing around, laughing at each other's jokes. Jim is definitely in love again, and this time he was able to enjoy a blossoming relationship without wondering where the next red check would come from. Quote, "The money and stuff is a wonderful thing," Jim told People. "I spend it." End quote. Boy, did he ever. In 1994 alone, Jim bought himself a vintage 1965 Thunderbird in $1 million home in Brentwood. But ever the doting dad, Jim did remember to put cash aside for Jane's college education. Jim really didn't have to worry about paying Jane's tuition or buying anything else she might want or need, especially after he signed his next contract, a whopping $20 million deal to do a sequel to Jim Carrey's Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. To quote The Mask, Jim's love life and his career were To quote The Mask, Jim's love life and his career were They were End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. Ka-ching! With the massive success of Dumb and Dumber, Jim was the indisputable king of gross-out comedies. But the success of Jim's films was not based solely on the slapstick humor and dirty jokes. There has always been a heart to Jim's characters, like the scene in Dumb and Dumber when Lloyd shouts out that he's sick and tired of having to eke my way through life. I'm sick and tired of being nobody. I'm sick and tired of having nobody. End quote. Director Peter Farrelly told Time magazine that while he was shooting that scene, tears welled up in Jim's eyes during every take. His emotions are at his fingertips, Peter explained. Jim's follow-up to Dumb and Dumber, Batman Forever, was released in 1995. Reviews for the film as a whole were not great, but Jim's over-the-top performance as the Riddler was universally praised, despite the mixed reviews. Everyone loved him. Batman Forever was a huge moneymaker, both in the United States and internationally. Many movie industry types seem to feel that it was Jim who brought it in the fans. Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, Batman Forever, it seemed that Jim had the Midas touch. Every movie he signed on turned to gold, they say. He had legions of loyal fans. According to Michael Levin, author of a book that lists the addresses of stars, Jim was now receiving more fan mail than any motion picture star, nearly 50,000 letters a month. People magazine named him one of the most intriguing people of 1994, and Barbara Walters interviewed him for her Oscar special in early 1995. It was wild. Jim could come up with only one explanation for what was happening in his life at that time. Quote, "I guess society is a lot more twisted than I thought." He joked. Jim treated this newfound success with typical sarcastic humor. Quote, "I'm thinking of changing my name to ka-ching, the sound of a cash register." Unquote. Unfunny. Jim's joy at his newfound fame was tempered by the fact that his dad wasn't around anymore to share his excitement. Percy Carey died in the fall of 1994. Even before his death, Percy had been suffering from Alzheimer's disease. That sucks. And probably was never aware of his son's worldwide success. Jim knew that no one would enjoy what was happening in his life the way Percy would have. But Jim had a special way of letting his dad know that he was a success now. Before Percy was buried, Jim placed something special in his father's suit pocket. The $10 million check Jim had made out to himself long ago on the night he drove over to Mulholland Drive and dreamt of being a star. Despite his grief, Jim pushed him to work on a new project right away. Jim knew he had to follow up his success with a surefire box office success to cement his position in Hollywood. The picture he chose to do, Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, a sequel to Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, was a safe bet. Which one was the one with the rhino? So good. Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls supposedly took place in Africa, but was actually shot in a wild animal preserve in Texas. The location was hot, and the stunts were tough. And of course, there was the issue of working with real animals. Quote, I actually touched one of the bats, Jim recalled to Entertainment Weekly. I touched it with my finger. And that's not a smart thing to do. I don't suggest anybody do that. But you know, I'm a professional. That's why I was cast as Ace Ventura, end quote. But all joking aside, Jim was going through tough times. He and Melissa were still in the process of finalizing their divorce. And Jim really missed his parents. It was hard getting used to not looking to them for support and approval. But Jim never brought his personal problems to the set. In public, he seemed to be his old wacky self. Luckily, Lauren Holly spent a lot of time with Jim on set, giving him a shoulder to lean on when it all seemed too much. Once Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls was finished and ready for release, Jim was all smiles and jokes once again. He was extremely proud of the final effort. Quote, it's sick. It's my ticket to the gates of hell, he bragged. It's like 10 times worse than the first one. What? And there's some pictures. I'll show these off. I'll take some pictures. First one's Jim Carrey jumping. Seems like he's having a fit. Oh my God, what is he doing? Jim reaches for the stars. First of all, he's not reaching. He's riding an invisible buffalo. This seems like nonsense. Oh my lord. That's Joey Tribbiani. Jim then. No. But yeah, okay, so. Whatever. Alright, so the next page is Ace Ventura. We get Ace Ventura, Riddler, and The Mask. So obviously, 2 great movies, 1 amazing movie. Next, we have The Cable Guy, and we got Dumb and Dumber. Okay, so 2 classics. Honestly, it's probably 2 of my favorites. So if you haven't seen either one of those, watch them both at the same time now. Go. Okay, Truman Show. Me, Myself, and Irene. Sweet. Good films. Again, great. We got him holding some golden nuggets. It looks like popcorn. Yeah, was it the Kids' Choice Awards? He's holding a microscope. He wants to win like a science award or something. And that's him dressed up as... Who is that? Is that James Vanderbeek? I don't know. Just joking. Oh, he's all kidding around on this one. Look how goofy he is. Look at those faces. Look at that. Wow. Okay. Moving on. Jim knew that Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls wasn't going to be the epic Gone with the Wind of its generation. He didn't want it to be. All Jim desired was for his audience to have a great time with the movie. Quote, I just wanted to be killer funny. He told reporters at the time, quote, kick ass, piss in your pants, run out the theater, throw yourself in traffic, funny, end quote. Which is exactly what the film turned out to be, just as Jim had hoped. The fans loved it so much that Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls outgrows the original Ace Ventura in cast, not just in jokes. It was obvious that Jim had found his niche in outrageous comedy flicks. So it was confusing to many Hollywood types when Jim announced that his next project would be Ben Stiller's dark, angry film, The Cable Guy. Even though Jim was being offered $20 million to make the film, plenty of insiders thought it was a mistake for Jim to play against type. That's a big no-no in Hollywood. But Jim loves playing against type. He thrives on surprising people both on and off camera. And playing a frightening stalker named Chip Douglas in The Cable Guy provided him with a chance to do just that. End of chapter 12. Moving on. 13, chapter 13, big changes. If no one else could figure out what had attracted Jim to The Cable Guy or to the character of Chip Douglas, Jim was very clear about it. Quote, I love the danger of him. End quote. Jim explained when the film was released in 1996, quote, you can never really figure out this guy. I don't even know if I would call the movie dark. It's dark only in the sense that this is a disturbed, needy person, and we need to take that to the maximum level. We pump up the volume on that. but he's not really as disturbed as I am normally. I had to bring it out of him. End quote. Jim didn't see The Cable Guy as a heavy psychological thriller. In fact, there were parts he found downright funny. There's something about this movie that's very strange and disquieting. And at the same time, I've just fallen off my chair laughing. We're taking our premise to the maximum level. We've got this disturbed, needy person, and you never really know if he's just messing with people or if he really just does need a friend. Now we're ending that quote. End quote. Jim loved working with director Ben Stiller on the film. As a comedian who'd gone on to act and direct, Ben understood Jim's need to stretch himself. Ben let Jim's experiment run rampant. The role of Chip Douglas took his talent in new directions. Jim, in turn, appreciated Ben's support and directing style. Quote, "I want to build a statue to Ben Stiller," Jim told one reporter. "I need a lot of room when I do a scene. Ben realizes this and knows just where to put the camera. He's truly amazing." End quote. Unfortunately, that was probably the only time the word amazing was attached to The Cable Guy. Audiences were not nearly as fascinated as Jim was with the character of Chip Douglas, a cable repairman who becomes obsessed with an architect, stalking him in hopes of forcing him to become his friend. Even the presence of the likable Matthew Broderick as the tormented architect did nothing to enhance the movie's box office appeal. In the end, The Cable Guy was relegated to cable itself. And Jim had to face his first failure in a very long time. But Jim didn't seem concerned. His mind and his heart were elsewhere. When his divorce from Melissa became final, Jim and Lauren were married in a ceremony on a hillside near Malibu. The wedding on September 23rd, 1996 was a quiet ceremony, with only a justice of the peace, Jim's brother John, and 90-year-old Jane in attendance. Oh, 9-year-old Jane. Surprisingly, the press stayed away from the ceremony, probably because they were off chasing the late John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife, Caroline, who married the same weekend. Later, Jim and Lauren sent out a press statement. Lauren was excited about her very sparkly wedding ring. Jim added that, despite the sometimes mind-boggling excitement I now face on a day-to-day basis, I am striving to live a loving and honorable life. Jim had little time to enjoy his newlywed status before he got busy on a new project. This one was closer to what his fans expected, a slapstick comedy called Liar Liar. Jim relied on his talent for physical comedy to bring life to Liar Liar. He also brought in Tom Shadyac, the director who had started him on his road to success with Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. The premise of Liar Liar is simple. Jim plays a fast-talking liar and lawyer who suddenly gets hit with a magic spell that prevents him from lying for one whole day. Quote, "It could have been a one-joke movie, but with Jim, we could take it in all sorts of directions." Tom Shadyac to Entertainment Weekly. Quote, "It's similar in tone to Miss Doubtfire. It's the movie that proves Jim can act in a human dramatic role but still deliver big laughs." End quote. Audiences were thrilled to have the old Jim back. They greeted this new comedy with his largest ticket sales ever, excluding Batman Forever, which can't really be considered a Jim Carrey movie since he had only a supporting role. Once again, Jim had scored big in a comedy. The time was obviously right for Jim to try his hand at an even bigger, wackier comedy, right? Wrong. As expected, Jim did the unexpected. He took a role he'd actually committed to for 2 years before in a serious drama called The Truman Show. Once again, all bets were off. Boom. End of chapter 13. Okay, here we go. Chapter 14. Here we go. We're just gonna cruise now. Going for the gold. By 1996, the world had taken voyeurism to a new level. MTV had had a hit with The Real World, a show about a group of real-life 20-somethings whose every move is captured by the cameras. The internet had given people who were so inclined to a means of broadcast their daily lives to the world, and people were tuning in to watch. The Truman Show was a science fiction look at what would happen if people's desire to be peeping Toms went too far. In the movie, Jim plays Truman Burbank, a doofy insurance salesman who lives with a perfect little wife in a perfect little house in a perfect little town. What Truman doesn't know is that all the people in his life are really actors and that his entire life is actually a hit TV show. The role was a huge departure for Jim, and he was excited about the challenge. Quote, "It's not Shakespeare, but it's more a human character than anything I have ever done. It's like Chaplin thing, with funny characters and whimsy and laughs, but it's got serious undertones and issues," end quote. Jim totally could relate to Truman's plight. Being a celebrity, he often felt that the cameras were turned on him at all times too. Quote, "I've brought family pictures to the photomat and had them end up in newspapers. Sold from the photo processing lab," end quote. Jim told Entertainment Weekly, quote, "People are like, you can't arrest me, you can't sue me, so just because you're famous, I'm going to make you feel like crap. But I never signed anything that said I wasn't a human being anymore," end quote. Jim and Lauren rented a mansion in Seaside, Florida, while The Truman Show was in production. Sorry. By all accounts, the couple were happily in love. Lauren visited the set while Jim was shooting scenes, and she sometimes helped him learn his lines while he skateboarded around the mansion's huge garage. Lauren was by Jim's side for most of the shooting schedule. Toward the end, she had to leave to film a movie on her own, No Looking Back. It seemed innocent enough at the time, but only 10 months, oh no, what's gonna happen? I got a hole in my sock. These are good. It seemed innocent enough at the time, but only 10 months after Jim and Lauren had married, she filed for divorce. Holy divorce, Batman. While they would later attempt a reconciliation, their marriage was over. Although Jim truly believed in The Truman Show, he was concerned about how the film would be received. The bad notices and poor fan reaction to the cable guy still smarted. It was a gutsy move on his part to take another departure from his comedic path. As Jim admitted to an AOL chat audience, going from goofball to dramatic actor wasn't an easy transition for him. Quote, "The most difficult part of making the transition from comedy to drama is the idea that you become raw in a dramatic acting role. You have to open yourself up to the ultimate criticism. Whereas, if you're funny, they can say, the routine wasn't good, or I don't like the jokes. But in a dramatic role, it's more, I don't like that guy's essence," end quote. Jim's fear of being universally trashed for his work in The Truman Show wasn't completely unfounded. His big price tag and high-profile success made him a target, and since the troubles with the cable guy, the press knew that more serious roles could be Jim's Achilles heel. Even Peter Weir, the movie's director, acknowledged that some of Jim's fans would stay away from The Truman Show. Quote, "We'll probably lose a certain number of Carrey's fans. It's not for them. They'll be bored." What? The Truman Show's great. The pressure for success was fierce, but Jim faced the stress with charismatic good humor. Quote, "I guess I'll go into the fetal position for a few days," end quote. Jim joked to Oprah Winfrey when she asked what he would do if The Truman Show failed. Luckily, Jim never had to curl up and pretend to return to the womb. Reviews for The Truman Show were wonderful. Entertainment Weekly called Jim's portrayal of Truman, quote, "a bracingly grown-up performance that's winning raves and drawing comparisons to Tom Hanks' work in Forrest Gump," end quote. The combination of curiosity and Carrey brought fans to the movies in droves. The Truman Show earned $31 million in its very first weekend. So now Jim had fame, fortune, and critical acclaim. What he didn't have was a gold statue on his mantle, but that was soon remedied. In 1999 of March, Jim won a Golden Globe Award for his performance in The Truman Show. Being acknowledged by the Hollywood foreign press was a huge honor for Jim. It was an acknowledgement of his work as an actor, not for his public persona as a star. Being up on the stage accepting a Golden Globe Award for Best Dramatic Actor was in Jim's lingo a total joygasm. Usually the Golden Globes are a precursor to the Oscars. Winners of the Globes are at the very least on the list of Academy Award nominees, but the Academy passed over Jim. When the nominations were announced, Jim's name wasn't there. Jim's fans and the press were shocked at the omission, but if Jim was disappointed, he didn't let it on. Good sport that he is, Jim agreed to a presenter on the Academy Award show, though. Although he made mention of the obvious oversight when he stepped out on the stage. Quote, "I'm here to present the Academy Award for Outstanding Achievement for Film Editing. That's all I'm here to do," he added slowly. Then he went on to say, "Winning the Oscar is not the most important thing in the world. It's an honor just to be oh, God." At that point, Jim burst into huge crocodile tears. The audience cracked up. Once again, Jim had used his humor to lighten a stressful situation. After the Truman Show, one question was on everyone's mind. What would Jim Carrey do next? Was he going to become a serious actor, or would he go back to his comedic roots? The answer was both. Although Jim did do a quick unbilled stint in the drama Simon Birch, his next big project was taking on the role of the late comedian Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon. To Jim, playing Andy Kaufman, a real comedian's comedian, was serious business. It would take all of his energy to turn himself into a man Jim had admired for many years. But to Andy's close friend and Man on the Moon's producer Danny DeVito, Jim and Andy already had an awful lot in common. Quote, "Jim's always looking to clown around and do stuff like that," Danny told people. "The only difference is, you see, the real Jim, Andy you never saw. He was always on." Andy Kaufman's brand of humor was certainly nothing like anything anyone had seen before or since. Although most people remember him as the foreign cab driver on TV's Taxi, his stand-up comedy act had a much harder edge. Andy was known to evoke laughs and revulsion by coming on stage as Tony Clifton, vulgar chauvinist and refusing to break character. Even when he was simply being Andy Kaufman, Andy could aggravate people. In one routine, he worked with pro wrestler Jerry Lawler. Andy so infuriated Lawler that the wrestler actually tried to beat him up. Andy was putting him on, but Lawler didn't know that. It was hard to tell when Andy was pulling a gag on someone. In fact, because Andy was always putting people on. Most of his friends didn't believe it when in 1984, it was announced that Andy had died of a rare form of lung cancer. They figured it was another joke. Jim focused all of his energy on becoming Andy Kaufman for Man on the Moon. Although Jim had never seen Andy perform live, he had seen him on TV and video. Quote, I was a crazy fan, and as I went along, I started getting these tapes and blurbs of things he had done," end quote. Jim told Dick Clark in 2000 Golden Globe Award show. Quote, "He was a gutsy dude who kind of went through the door and took all the flack. He opened things up for people like me." Quote. Jim felt he owed Andy a performance that was true to the comedian's spirit. Quote, "It was very important for me to do justice to him," Jim says. "He was on such another level. He had a pure need to create. He was like Geppetto. He walked into a room and didn't see people who would like him or not like him, hurt him or help him. He saw the world as his own little puppet show. I think of him as Neil Armstrong of comedy. He went places no one else had gone," end quote. So obsessed was Jim with paying tribute to Andy that he literally became the man while he was on the set, staying in character even between takes. He pulled Andy-like stunts and requested 2 trailers, one for Andy and one for Tony Clifton. He rented an ice cream truck and gave everyone on the set a snack. Long as they sang a song first, at one point Jim, remaining in character, offended the real Jerry Lawler, who had been hired to play himself in the film. After the cameras had stopped rolling, in a strange echo of Andy's real life, Jerry Lawler attacked Jim. At the time, Jim's manager, Eric Gold, released a statement that Mr. Lawler attacked unprofessionally and attacked Jim Carrey. He attacked him and injured Jim's neck. Even after production on Man on the Moon had ended, Jim continued to pull Andy like stunts, coming to the MTV Movie Awards dressed as a lookalike for the late lead singer of The Doors, Jim Morrison. No one even realized it was Jim Carrey under the thick beard and long hair until he went up to the podium and to receive his award for the Truman Show. Jim was aware that his behavior was viewed as strange by some on the set, but he was determined to remain true to his gut instinct that in order to play Andy, he had to stay in character. As he put it, quote, "I'm not saying I had to go insane to do the film, but I know that there's some nights when I went to bed as a character who was insane." End quote. Jim's hard work paid off. Critics hailed his portrayal of Andy Kaufman, and although Man on the Moon was not the financial smash that Universal Studios was hoping for, it did cement Jim's reputation as an actor to be reckoned with in Hollywood. Still, no one was as shocked as Jim was when he won the Golden Globe Award as Best Actor in a Comedy or Musical for his portrayal of Andy Kaufman. After all, Jim had thought of Man on the Moon as a drama. Quote, "I was a little shocked that it was in the comedy or musical category," he admitted in his acceptance speech, "but I'll go with it. I'll get a songbook." What? Right? Oh gosh. Sorry. Right to Broadway, man. Then he began to sing "You Can't Get a Man with a Gun," a song from Annie, Get Your Gun, a popular musical. Obviously, the real Jim Carrey was back among us. Sadly, once again, Jim's Golden Globe winning performance was ignored by Oscar voters in 2000. Although Jim may have been disappointed at losing another shot at bringing home the statue, he was too busy to be overly concerned. When the names of the Oscar nominees were announced, he was putting the finishing touches of his next film, a wacky comedy called Me, Myself, and Irene. Me, Myself, and Irene was definitely a return to the kind of comedy that had first raised Jim to superstar status. Once again, he teamed up with the Farrelly brothers, who had written and directed Dumb and Dumber. This time around, Bob and Peter were high on the success of their big hit, There's Something About Mary. Originally, the brothers had agreed to write the script for Me, Myself, and Irene, and leave the directing to somebody else. But when Jim decided to sign on to the project, the Farrelly brothers opted to direct the on-set madness themselves. With There's Something About Mary, the Farrelly brothers had taken slapstick comedy to an extreme. Me, Myself, and Irene took things even further. With sight gags involving animals, they were all animatronic, so no animals were actually injured. An all-new set of butt jokes. Things were so gross and strange that people began to wonder whether there was anything Jim wouldn't do for a laugh. Quote, "I don't know where the line is yet," unquote, Jim admitted to E! Online. Then he acknowledged that he and the Farrelly brothers do share a decidedly bizarre sense of humor. Describing an average day on the set, he explained, quote, "Typically, I'd go on into the trailer for an hour or two, then come out and say, okay, what sick, twisted fantasy would you like to vicariously live through me?" End quote. Jim loved the premise of Me, Myself, and Irene, a man with two personalities named Hank and Charlie, both of whom were in love with the same woman. Quote, "I really love the concept of two schizophrenic entities falling in love with the same person. I could play two characters in the film and have them play off each other," he explains. "It was a chance to go and do the careless thing a little bit. Just have a good time. Just having a good time playing schizophrenic. Oh boy." Jim's female co-star on the wild Me, Myself, and Irene's ride was Renee Zellweger, a beautiful actress best known for her work as Tom Cruise's love interest, and Jerry Maguire. By all accounts, Jim was smitten with Renee. Shocking. I almost drank a candle. But unlike his on-screen Dumb and Dumber romance with Lauren Holly, Jim hit a major roadblock with Renee while the movie was in production. Renee had a rule that she never dated anyone with whom she was working. She and Jim would hang out together, going for long walks along the shore of Lake Champlain. She also showed up on the rest of the cast, with the rest of the cast at an ice skating party Jim arranged at an indoor skating rink. But the only romance she allowed for was on screen until filming ended. By the time Me, Myself, and Irene was released in the summer of 2000, Jim and Renee were a full-fledged item. He visited her in London while she was working on the movie Bridget Jones, and they hung out together in her Los Angeles home, playing with her dog, Wolf. Wolf is his dog's name. Jim told reporters for People magazine that Renee was absolutely a gem of a human being. She's very funny, even though she can be bashful at times, end quote. but he was careful not to reveal too much about the relationship to the press. He'd been burned before, and his relationship was too far important for him to risk any outside interference. No doubt about it. Like Hank and Charlie, Jim Carrey had totally flipped for Renee. Wow, that's end of chapter 14. Oh. Here we go, chapter 15. It's not easy being green. When Audrey Giselle, widow of Dr. Seuss, his real name was Theodore Giselle, oh no, announced that she would allow producers to make a live-action movie based on one of her husband's most famous books, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. A bidding war broke out in Hollywood. It seemed that every studio wanted to bring the small-hearted meanie who steals Christmas from Whoville to the big screen. Eventually, the rights went to Universal Studios in partnership with Imagine Films. It was the joining with Imagine that sealed the deal, because Miss Giselle was a huge fan of Ron Howard, one of the founding partners of Imagine. She agreed that Universal could have the rights to The Grinch as long as Ron Howard directed the film. Okay, so now The Grinch had a studio and a director. What it didn't have was a star. Not just anybody could play The Grinch. The actor who took on the role would have to have a truly devilish side in addition to being a long, lean, physical comic. Now, who could that be? Jim told E! Online that he was excited to have been cast in the role. Quote, "Grinch is a total honor to be part of," he remarked. "I felt like I would won the lottery to be able to play the Grinch." Actually, Jim did better than the average lottery winner by signing on to the film. Universal agreed to pay his $20 million price tag and gave him a piece of the merchandising rights. But if Jim thought he was going to have a good time doing another physical comedy, he was in for a real shock. The Grinch was hard work, especially for someone like Jim, who can't sit still. In fact, sitting patiently in the makeup chair may have been the toughest part of playing the Grinch for Jim. Every morning at 4:30, he had to be on set, ready to begin the transformation that turned him into the guy with termites in his smile. Throughout the film, Jim was covered from head to toe in green makeup, and although Universal and Imagine preferred to keep Jim's Grinch look a secret until the film opened, word leaked out from the set that Jim was almost unrecognizable after the makeup folks had their way with him. While the makeup did turn Jim into the Grinch, it also provided him with a challenge. Jim realized that for the first time, really young kids would be seeing one of his movies. As a father, Jim was concerned that little children would not be petrified at the sight of the Grinch. He kept that in mind, putting together his characterization of the Grinch. Quote, "I didn't look at him like he's just an angry guy," Jim explained to E! Online. "What we are is hurt, whether it's self-imposed or something happened to us or whatever. We're hurt, and it manifests itself in anger. Thinking of the Grinch in that way enabled me to be a little bit more sympathetic, because it could have gotten scary with all the makeup and stuff, and kids are going to have to be able to watch it." Just finished filming The Grinch in the middle of 2000. Rumors flew about the project he would take on next. Some tabloids and internet sites had Jim taking on a part in The Incredible Mr. Limpet, a remake of the Don Knotts movie, in which Limpet is granted a wish to become a fish. Plans were for Jim to play the title role in a live-action version. Animators would then create a fish that looked like Jim for the animated parts of the movie. Jim would do the voice for the talking fish. But there were clashes between Warner Brothers studio and the writers over the script, and eventually the project was postponed. Thank God. Another film Jim was rumored to be interested in pursuing was Phone Booth. Really? The story of a man who answers a ringing payphone and is told by a terrorist that he will be killed if he hangs up. Jim was attracted to Phone Booth, partly because he was going to be directed by Joel Schumacher, who had directed Jim in Batman Forever. Jim also liked the idea behind the film. Quote, "Phone Booth is an important story," he told E! Online. "Not only is it a great experiment, the film will be shot in 2 weeks and the whole thing takes place in a phone booth. But the scope of the piece is important to me. It's everything we have to deal with to get to a healthy place. Our secrets and whatever mistakes we've made that we think are so bad," according to E! Online. Jim was so intrigued by the fact that Fox Studios planned to show rehearsal footage from phone booth on the internet so fans could see the details of how the movie was being made. There were other scripts on Jim's short list as well. One of those was Bijou, a drama about a film writer who is placed on professional blacklist by the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1951. When he arrived in a small town, the people there decide that he is the long-lost son of the owner of the local movie theater. At the same time, Jim was also believed to have been considered trying his hand at yet another comedy, The Scared Guys, which was slated to be directed for Columbia Pictures by Dean Parisot, who also directed The Crew. But by the end of the summer of 2000, Jim had not yet decided whether one of these scripts or a different film altogether would be his next project. So his fans had no idea whether Jim would go for humor or angst in his next film. Keeping folks guessing was just what Jim had in mind. The very people who say, quote, the very people who say, I just want him to do this one thing that I like, will be the first people to get tired of you, Jim insists. So you've got to zig and zag. You can't just give them what you think they want. My audience may be made fun of sometimes, but I believe they know there's more to me. End quote. One project Jim was certain he would not be doing was the long-awaited sequel to The Mask. He told an AOL chat audience, quote, I'm not a crazy fan of going over old territory, and although The Mask was a great thing, I don't really plan on doing the sequel. You can never say never, but not really. I'm getting an opportunity to do all these new and wonderful things. Why waste my life being repetitive? End quote. Whatever Jim's next project will be, one thing is for sure, it will be completely different from anything else at the local movie plex. And it will probably be quite different from anything Jim Carrey has done before. I can't stay in one place for very long, he says of his career choices. He explained to MovieClub.com, I am an explorer and I need to discover new lands. Sometimes you have to dive into the abyss to get another place, to go somewhere. And I have never been afraid to dive into the abyss, end quote. Luckily for Jim Carrey, his fans seem willing to follow him into whatever land he may explore next. End of chapter 15. Wait, is that the end of the book? Oh. Chapter 16 is going to be a quick one. Just some fast facts. Everything you know about Jim Carrey. Everything. Full name, James Eugene Carrey. Jim hates his middle name, but he admits that it does have a purpose. My parents gave me that middle name to keep me humble. You can't get too cool with a name like Eugene. Hey, my best friend's name is Eugene. Chill out, Jim. Childhood nicknames, Jimmy, Jimmy Jean, the String Bean. Original family surname, Carrey. Family is of French descent. Birthday, January 17th, 1962. Zodiac sign is Capricorn, with the moon in Gemini. Birthplace, Newmarket, Ontario, Canada. Eyes, brown. Hair, brown. This is creepy. Don't care. I care. I love Jim. We all love Jim. Jim, father, Percy Carrey, musician and accountant, deceased. Sorry, Jim. Mother, Kathleen K., former singer, also deceased. Siblings, John, Pat, and Rita, all older. Daughter, Jane Carrey, whose mother is Melissa. Residence, Brentwood, California. Current girlfriend, Renee Zellweger. What was this written? Who puts that in a book? Morning or late night person. Quote, I tend to stay up late, not because I'm partying, but it's only the time of day when I'm alone and I don't have to be on performing. Favorite band? Fish. Jim actually arranged for a private Fish concert on June 24th of 1999. The audience was the cast and crew of Me, Myself, and Irene. Jim sang Pink Floyd's Hey You and the Beatles Come Together with the band. Oh yeah. Favorite cartoon character, Deputy Dog. Favorite snack, potato chips and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. How Jim spends his free time. Movies, and movies. I rent them and I go see them, all of them, all the time. Favorite authors, Ayn Rand and C.S. Lewis. He also enjoys books about philosophy and metaphysical concepts. boy does he. What makes him laugh? Someone who says something that makes absolutely no sense at all. The best part of award-winning success. It's nice to finally get scripts offered to me that aren't the ones Tom Hanks wipes his butt with. Dig. Surprising talents. Jim's a talented cartoonist and ventriloquist. Present car, a vintage Thunderbird collectible. 1960s. Alright, that's it. Fast facts, everything you need to know about Jim Carrey. Boom, done. Next. Chapter 17. Here we go. Lights, camera, action! Many people were surprised that Jim Carrey was willing to take on serious roles in films like The Cable Guy and The Truman Show. They found it odd that someone so famous for comedy would try something different. But were those roles really such a change from characters Jim had played in the past? All true Jim Carrey fans know that the answer to that question is absolutely not. Throughout his career, Jim has played a whole slew of different types of characters. Some were serious, some were dangerous, and some were just butt-talking nuts. But a common thread ran through all of them. They all had a distinctly human, real side. To get a handle on Jim Carrey's diverse talents, you've got to study his career from the very beginning. You can start by reading this chapter. Yeah, I'm already doing that, buddy. And then heading over to your local video store to check out, what is it gonna be? Some Jim Carrey videos. Be warned that once you start on a Jim Carrey movie marathon, it's tough to stop. Jim's movies are like potato chips. You can't have just one, and since Jim's career is now into its third decade, you could spend a lot of time in front of that VCR. Introducing Janet. Oh, these are just all of his movies now. Literally, it's synapses for his movies. And then there's a quiz back there too. All right, well, I promised the whole thing. Introducing Janet. This dramatic film was first broadcast on Canadian television in September 1981. The movie tells the story of two teens who become friendly and help each other discover their hidden talents. Jim plays Tony Maroney, a really bad stand-up comic. How's that for irony? Actually, the casting doesn't seem so strange when you realize that it takes a really good comic to know how to throw his timing off enough to make an act not work. If you're at the video store looking for Introducing Janet, you'll never find it. The film was later retitled Rubberface in an attempt to cash in on Jim's comedic fame. Copper Mountain. Made in 1982 for the CTV network. This was Jim's second TV movie, but unlike Introducing Janet, which concerns a friendship between two teens, there is nothing serious about this combo of sports, rock and roll, and sex appeal. Copper Mountain takes place on a Club Med ski resort. Playing Bob, a guy with a weird nervous tic that has him doing impressions whenever he gets stressed out, allows Jim to take his comedy act to the small screen. In this movie, he performs in a way that is more Jim Carrey than he was able to do in Introducing Janet. Copper Mountain is certainly not memorable. Yeah. In fact, the low-budget flick is no longer even available on video. Considering it's a Jim Carrey movie, that says a lot. Why am I reading about it? All in good taste. This small Canadian film was actually in production in 1980 before Jim appeared in Introducing Janet. But it wasn't released until 1983. It's actually unfair to call this a Jim Carrey film. After all, Jim had no lines and very little screen time in this story about a screenwriter who discovers that his wholesome script about an orphan and a dog has been turned into a risque movie about strippers. What? It's tough to find all in good taste anymore. Oops, I ripped the page. Internet users have claimed to discover copies of it. Yeah, okay. Finders Keepers. Richard Lester, the man behind the classic Beatles film Hard Day's Night Help. Yeah, we already read it. Directed this wacky 1984 chase movie, which starred Beverly Angelo, Louis Gossett Jr., and Michael O'Keefe. The comedy had it all: stolen money, disguises, con artists, chase scenes on a train. When Jim took on a small part of Lane Biddlecoff in the film, he was Sure, he was in yet another of Richard Lester's comic classics. No such luck. As movie reviewer Leonard Maltin put it, the movie remains disappointingly flat. Audiences agreed, and before long, Finders Keepers disappeared from view. Though you can find it at your video store, at your Blockbuster! Once Bitten. Everyone knows what Once Bitten is. Model turned actress Lauren Hutton is the Countess, a Hollywood vampire in search of the blood of a male virgin. If she doesn't find it soon, she'll begin to look her actual age, about 400. Guess who winds up supplying her with what she needs? It's Jim Carrey. Once Bitten didn't give Jim much of a chance to show off his stuff. Still, he did what he could with the part, including a 3-leg dance routine that's completely off the wall. As Film.com puts it, Carrey uses a lot of physical energy to make up for the fact that he doesn't have a character to play. End quote. Once Bitten was not a huge hit, but it did turn a profit. And of course, in video, it has become somewhat of a success. Specifically because Jim's fans view the film as part of his history. Most of his history just seems to be like erased. Moving on, Peggy Sue got married. Best remembered for the performances of Kathleen Turner and Nicolas Cage, who played the leads in this romantic comedy, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Small world alert. Francis Ford Coppola is actually Nicolas Cage's uncle. Nicolas is one of Jim's good friends. Remember this, it's gonna be on the test. As Charlie's buddy, Walter gets Jim's screen time is so short you might miss him if you blink. But there is one scene that you can fast forward to if you're in such of a classic Carrey mood. Find the spot where Nicolas and Jim perform as part of a doo-wop quintet. There was no mentions of Jim's small performance in the original reviews of the movie, but once he became famous, video reviewers were sure to remind fans to keep an eye out for Jim's portrayal of the high school best friend who grows up to be a drug-snorting dentist. Peggy Sue Got Married was one of the hits of the 1986, earning more than $40 million at the box office. Today, you can catch it playing on cable on a regular basis. The Deadpool was Clint Eastwood's fifth and final turn as Dirty Harry Callahan, perhaps his most popular on-screen persona. In his flick, a weird betting game is being played. People are gambling on which celebrity will be the next to die. Clint handpicked Jim for the part of Johnny Shakes, a wacky drug-addicted rock singer who's the first celeb to bite the dust. A Dirty Harry movie release was an event back in 1988. The film opened to nice reviews. Even the notorious curmudgeon Roger Ebert praised the film, saying, "It knows how dirty Harry is and how we react to him. And it was fun with its intelligence." End quote. Although critics didn't mention Jim by name, his role in the movie gave him great exposure, and since Clint Eastwood had given him permission to be as wacky as he wanted, the audience truly got to see the real Jim Carrey. Actually, the real James Carrey, which is the way Jim is listed in on the credits. Pink Cadillac. Oh my god. Jim had a small role in this Clint Eastwood movie. His character was credited simply as lounge singer, but he didn't mind. Any chance to share the screen with Clint was a thrill for Jim. In this case, he got to pull out his old Elvis imitation and perform it on the silver screen. You'll find Jim shaking his hips on stage in the nightclub scene, singing Blue Suede Shoes. The spotlight, that's a great one. The spotlight in that scene is on Clint and Broadway actress Bernadette Peters. Jim just provides the ambiance. In this movie, Clint plays a bounty hunter who's trying to nab a bail jumper named Roy, who has run off with his neo-Nazi buddies and taken his baby with him. Oh. Okay, Clint agrees to help Roy's wife, Luann, played by Bernadette Peters, get her baby back. Reviews for the movie were mixed. Washington Post reviewer Hale Henning-Sensen summed up the general view of the film by calling a Pink Cadillac embraceable. movie trash that seduces you into dropping your defenses. It's weightlessly, undeniably enjoyable. What more can you ask for? Earth Girls Are Easy! Finally, Jim Carrey finds a movie where he can totally be himself, an alien from outer space. It's hard to describe Earth Girls Are Easy. It's kind of a sci-fi romantic musical comedy. Think of it as an alien invasion flick for the MTV generation. It's a mishmash for sure, but the film works. Mostly thanks to the amazing talent of the cast. The movie stars Jeff Goldblum, Damon Wayans, and Jim Carrey as aliens whose spaceship splashes down in Gina Davis's pool. Sometimes it's hard to tell who's weirder, the aliens or the Valley Girls they meet up with. Earth Girls Are Easy had a rocky beginning. It was originally supposed to be released in 1988, but it was put on shelf until 1989 when it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. Eventually, the movie opened it nationwide and audiences loved it. Critic Leonard Maltin called the film infectiously goofy musical comedy. End quote. High strung. In this bizarre 1991 comedy, Jim takes on one of the most ominous characters of his career, Death! High-strung character Steve Oderick, who later went on to write Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls. As a cranky children's book author who does nothing but complain, he hates everything, including pets, insects, his neighbors, even watermelon-flavored popsicles. Then one day he begins to receive strange phone calls, warning him that something is going to happen at 8 o'clock that night. Jim's name doesn't appear in the credits of this film. He did it as a favor to his bud Steve, but his presence is definitely felt. This movie is available on video, but it can be tough to find. Doing time on Maple Drive. Talk about a serious movie. There's nothing funny about life on Maple Drive. In fact, life there is incredibly sad. Jim's role as Tim, the alcoholic son of a demanding and unrelenting father, was a complete departure from his goofball work in Earth Girls Are Easy. Jim took his part very seriously. The result was a mesmerizing performance that will go down as one of Jim's most memorable. The movie aired on Fox Television Network in 1992. March 16th, it enjoyed high ratings and earned 3 Emmy nominations. Although Jim wasn't one of the nominees, he did receive good reviews for his work. Good job, Jim. Today, you can catch rebroadcasts of the movie from time to time on Lifetime. Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. This wacky 1994 comedy is widely considered Jim's breakout film. Nobody could have predicted it at the time, since Ace Ventura was a small film with a mere $15 million budget. When the movie first came out, the reviews were beyond bad. Washington Post reviewer Dezan Howe called Ace Ventura: Pet Detective a mindless stretch of nonsense. And Roger Ebert warned his readership that if the movie is long, it is unfunny slog through an impenetrable plot. Unquote. Despite such warnings, this story of a Florida gumshoe cracks cases involving animals became a comedy classic. Fans couldn't get enough of Jim's wackiness, as his character Ace goes out in search of a football team's mascot. Before anyone knew it, Jim Carrey was a household name, and kids everywhere were trying to talk through their butts and shouting out, "Alrighty then!" Cash registers at movie theaters bulged nationwide as the films earned that film earned $12 million in its first week, and eventually went on to gross $72 million in its initial release. The Mask. Jim had 2 roles in this totally whacked out comedy as a wormy bank teller who becomes a fearless, green-faced, wacky, wild man every time he places an old Viking mask on his face. Playing 2 different roles in one man provided a showcase for Jim's acting prowess and crazy cartoon-like antics. Whenever he came on screen in his bright yellow suit and huge hat, audiences couldn't be sure what insanity might ensue. The animation of The Mask was flawless. Thanks to the special effects wizards at Industrial Light and Magic, working within the film's $20 million budget, they created a world in which the line between reality and cartoon was seamless. The Mask earned a phenomenal $120 million in the United States alone, as The Mask would say, "Somebody stop me." Dumb and Dumber. Dumb and Dumber is a road trip buddy movie, Jim Carrey style. In this flagrantly funny flick, Jim, playing limo driver Lloyd Christmas, and co-star Jeff Daniels, playing Lloyd's friend Harry, take to the road and travel halfway across the country to return a briefcase to a beautiful passenger who left it in Lloyd's car. By the movie's 1994 release, critics were used to Jim's antics, and they were able to see Jim's frenetic comedy style for the true art form that it was. The reviews of Dumb and Dumber matched the enthusiasm of the fans. The San Francisco Chronicle called it smart comedy with lowbrow laughs, and went on to describe the film as inspired, irreverent, spark-driven comedy that takes you places you never thought a movie would go. Even a Jim Carrey movie. End quote. In their video movie guide, Mick Martin and Marcia Porter say that Jim and Jeff were to the 1990s what Laurel and Hardy were to 1930s and Abbott Costello were to 1940s. High praise for the king of lowbrow comedy and his cohort. Dumb and Dumber proved that Jim's previous successes were no fluke. The film earned $127 million in its initial 1994 release. End quote. Oh my god. Okay. Oof. Batman Forever. It's a rare for a leading actor to take on a supporting role after a string of huge successes. But who could blame Jim for wanting to play the Riddler in the third Batman movie? The Riddler was the perfect role for Jim. It required almost manic energy and an ability to practically dance across the screen as a comic book character brought to life. Batman Forever was Jim's biggest budget film. It cost more than $100 million. Although all of the stars, Val Kilmer as Batman, Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face, and Jim earned hefty salaries, most of the cash went into the incredible special effects. Batman Forever opened in the summer of 1995 on 4,000 screens nationwide, a record at the time. It went on to earn more than $184 million in the United States, but not as much as the original from 1989 with Jack Nicholson as the Joker and Michael Keaton as the Caped Crusader, but more than 1992's Batman Returns. Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls. This sequel to Ace Ventura: Pet Detective was an unusual career move for Jim. It's the only sequel he has ever agreed to do. The premise was simple. Ace Ventura goes off to Africa to find White Bat. The comedy was classic Carrey. No animal joke was beneath him, whether it was taking a frightening ride on an ostrich, feeding an eagle mouth to mouth, or giving a mighty Tarzan yell through his rear end. Reviews for Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls were even worse than those for the original Ace flick. USA Today said, "No doubt, Ace 2 will further engorge Jim Carrey's bank account. If only the jokes held more interest." And Time magazine added to the cat call, insisting that When Nature Calls was wearying, stupefying, and dumber than dumb, unquote. Once again, however, Jim's fans proved immune to the critics' barbs. They packed theaters. Eventually, Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls earned $108 million, even more than the original. The Cable Guy. When Jim took the role of Chip Douglas, the frighteningly bizarre cable installer and repairman who stalks a mild-mannered architect in this dark 1996 film, he was obviously looking for a change after playing so many wildly comedic roles. Unfortunately, Jim's audiences couldn't connect with their favorite funny man playing an obsessive, frightening character who was only occasionally humorous. Jim's fans stayed away from the film. Still, The Cable Guy did manage to earn $60 million! So, just magically, on its initial run, that would have been a respectable figure for just about any movie, but not for Jim Carrey. As far as Hollywood was concerned, The Cable Guy was a flop. Ironically, while the fans stayed away, the critics were kinder to The Cable Guy than they were to Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls. Richard Schickel, for example, said that the movie's dark theme suits Jim Carrey's comic genius and its eerie blend of sublime self-confidence. And like Matthew Broderick, is the customers watching this performance were fearful and fascinated. We have no choice but to let him into our lives. USA Today praised the casting of the movie. This set of boogers and belches guy off as its star comic foil equal weight. The effectively modified Matthew Broderick, and a more linear story than we've had in ages. The gag happy vehicle that thus typified Carrey's screen career. The USA Today review went on to praise Jim's hair-raising performance, saying, Carrey's lisping cable installer is frightening to both the eye and the brain. Even at his worst, the Cable Guy is a legitimate curio. Unquote. Liar, liar. No lying. Liar, liar put Jim Carrey back on the top box office charts. The movie earned $181 million, almost as much as Batman Forever. With Jim as a sole big bankable star, the movie was a return to Jim's famous physical comedy shtick, but there was more to Liar, Liar than gross jokes and toilet talk. Although Jim did spend one scene bashing himself in the head with a toilet seat, beside Jim's high-energy comedy, there seemed to be a real heart behind his performance as Fletcher Reed, a fast-talking attorney who also happens to be a perpetual liar. Fletcher really loves his 5-year-old son, even though the kid did wish for him to stop lying for 24 hours. Audiences and critics alike cheered Jim's performance in Liar, Liar. Even hard-to-please Roger Ebert, here we go, admitted to becoming a fan of Jim's, calling the movie high-energy comeback after The Cable Guy, and praising Jim by saying,
I can imagine the idea of the lawyer forced to tell the truth. It's getting old really fast, with a lesser actor, but Carrey literally throws himself into the screen.
HBO Online offered even higher praise, telling readers that Jim Carrey shows the world how to turn a routine sitcom plot into a phenomenal box office hit. The Truman Show! After the amazing reception of Liar Liar, Jim once again made a daring career move by taking the title role of Truman Burbank, a man who lives in an idyllic small town, not realizing that he is star of a reality TV show. Andrew Nichols' script was smart and shrewd and attracted Jim's love of the theater of the absurd. Jim's performance in The Truman Show was a tour de force that critics unanimously adored. Mick Martin and Marsha Porter, in their video movie guide, wrote of the frankly astonishing performance from Jim Carrey that's leagues above anything he's ever done. End quote. Owen Gleiberman called The Truman Show a beautifully sinister and transfixing entertainment age daydream. Carrey turns Truman into a postmodern Capra hero. End quote. In Jim's hometown, Toronto.com praised his work, saying that his performance is an all-grown-up child surrounded by slavish actors and looking for his own 15 minutes and tinged slivers of grisly tragedy. End quote. The Truman Show gave Jim his first Golden Globe Award. It was also proved that he could bring in big money at the box office. While taking on more challenging roles, the film delivered a whopping $125 million in its initial 1998 U.S. theater release. Simon Birch. If The Cable Guy and The Truman Show were departures for Jim, being part of the cast of 1998's Simon Birch was totally off the wall. Simon Birch is one of those tug-at-your-heartstring movies named you'd never associate with someone who's been nicknamed Rubberface. It is the story of a disabled boy who is trying to figure out his purpose on Earth. Along the way, he helps his friend Joe discover the identity of his real dad. Many of the people who went to see Simon Birch were probably unaware that Jim had taken part in the movie. He appeared in only the first and last scenes, spending the rest of the time as an unseen narrator. Although he performed without billing, his work didn't escape the notice of the critics, and it didn't go over too well with them. Mike Clark of USA Today was especially unkind. He blasted Jim by writing that
Carrey's dreadful narration as the grown-up Joe Mazzello pegs us as the kind of artistic elapse Billy Crystal and Robin Williams have been known to make when they want to be loved and not laughed at.
Man on the Moon. When word went out that casting was beginning on a film about comic Andy Kaufman, Jim was determined to get the role. He even agreed to audition for the part, a rarity for the star of his magnitude. When Jim was finally cast as Andy, he threw himself into the role, literally becoming Andy when he was on set. The result was a phenomenally accurate portrayal of the comic. It's not easy to play a real person, especially someone who lived recently and is remembered by a great number of people. But Jim was so like Andy on screen that the line between art and reality often seemed blurred. The movie recreated many of the famous moments in Andy's life practically word for word. In fact, the entire cast of Taxi, the 1970s TV series that Andy once starred in, reunited to play themselves in the film. The people who knew Andy best had high praise for Jim's portrayal of their pal. The critics followed in kind. Movie Review International's Heather Clisby remarked that successfully slipped into Andy's skin with some ease, and it's a snug fit.
the transition is complete.
I'm not going to do that voice again. Entertainment Weekly's Owen Gleiberman agreed, saying that
Jim Carrey's performance is an inspiration of the level of genius.
but all the praise in Jim's Golden Globe weren't enough to bring the fans. The picture grossed only a mere $34 million before going into video release. Me, Myself, and Irene. There have always been two sides to Jim Carrey: the class clown and the sensitive soul. It was only natural that he'd be drawn into multiple personality role of Charlie and Hank, two guys in one body. Charlie's a sweetie, sensitive, and even a little nerdy. Hank's a creep who's capable of just about anything if it means landing a lady. Both guys are in love with the same girl. Sounds like something only the Farrelly brothers would come up with, and it's a part only Jim Carrey could pull off. When Me, Myself, and Irene came out in the summer of 2000, the reviews were mixed. Time magazine's Richard Corliss felt that
Jim Carrey is twice as funny half the time,
explaining that as a moviegoer you would
laugh your ass off if the first half of the movie, but the comedy needs a climax, and long before that Me, Myself, and Irene go slack and desperate.
Still, Corliss did single out Jim's performance.
For his first real comedy in 3 years, Carrey's all manic ingenuity. Yeah, his eyebrows tango, he sports a dry mouth and a milk mustache, he executes a quintuplet spit take. He has the timing and gall, as in his metamorphosis from Charlie to Hank in one shot and with no special effects. You don't need ILM when you have James.
End quote. The Grinch. By the end of the 20th century, all the Who's down in Whoville and folks in Hollywood as well were wondering if Jim Carrey would agree to play Dr. Seuss's Green Pigs Meanie in the movie version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. He accepted the part in 1999 and in front of the cameras by 2000. There was no doubt to anyone's mind that the November 2000 release would be a huge success. As early as July 2000, Entertainment Weekly was predicted that it's a no-brainer, that this will be a huge, big hit. Industry insiders predicted that the picture's gross would be at least $85 million, if not more. When all was said and done, and that was without any footage ever being shown, toy companies were also betting big on a Grinchy Christmas, creating everything from computer games to action figures based on Jim's portrayal of the classic Dr. Seuss character. End of chapter 17! Alright, chapter 18. The envelope, please! I don't imagine myself winning things. I just work. That's the bottom line. That's what I love to do. I did not expect it. Jim was totally sincere when he made that declaration to a chat room audience after winning a Golden Globe for The Truman Show in 1999. He truly was shocked. I was freaking out, he admitted. Lauren Bacall opened the envelope up and all I heard was jet. My brain went out the window. It was really great. Of course, Jim's fans were disappointed a few weeks later when he failed to be nominated for an Academy Award for his work in The Truman Show. But if Jim was upset by the slight, it certainly didn't show. He was just happy for the film's success. Having his fans accept him in a drama was more important to him than all the trophies in the world. Jim really doesn't care about all the awards, no matter how many fake tears he sheds on the Academy show. But that hasn't stopped the folks who give out awards from sending a few statues his way. While the Oscars have been elusive, there are plenty of trophies on Jim's mantelpiece. Here are a list. Blockbuster Entertainment Award, 1995, Favorite Actor Comedy on Video for Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. 1995, Favorite Male Newcomer on Video for Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. 1998, Favorite Actor Comedy for Liar Liar. Boston Society of Film Critics Awards, 1999, Best Actor for Man on the Moon. Golden Globes, 1999, Best Performance for an Actor in a Motion Picture Drama, The Truman Show. 2000, Best Performance for an Actor in a Motion Picture, Comedy, or Musical, Man on the Moon. MTV Movie Awards, 1995, Best Comedic Performance for Dumb and Dumber. Best Kiss for Dumb and Dumber, shared with Lauren Holly. 1996, Best Comedic Performance for Ace Ventura When Nature Calls. Best Performance for Ace Ventura When Nature Calls. 1997, Best Comedic Performance for The Cable Guy. Best Villain, The Cable Guy. 1998, Best Comedic Performance for Liar Liar. 1999, Best Performance for Truman Show. Show West Convention USA. 2000, Male Star of the Year. Walk of Fame. 2000, Star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. End of chapter 18. Oh, I can taste it. I can feel the end. I feel the end. Chapter 19, The Leader of the Pack. There's never been an actor quite like Jim Carrey. After all, while promoting Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, Jim himself said that before Ace Ventura, no actor had considered talking through their ass. End quote. But since Ace Ventura, lots of actors have been making butt jokes, fat jokes, sex jokes, and urinating jokes. Though not always with the unique style Jim has displayed. The truth is, Jim Carrey has led a Hollywood revolution, an all-out, gross-out slapstick attack on the film industry. Jim's influence can be seen in the work of many young comedic performers, as well as having paved the way for some of his contemporaries. Ben Stiller. Ben Stiller is the son of two famous comedians, Maria, and Jerry Stiller. His parents are comedy royalty. Besides having a great stand-up act, has appeared in several movies and TV shows, including Archie Bunker's Place. Jerry is best remembered these days for having played George's loud father on Seinfeld. But even with that kind of legacy, Ben Stiller is truly a comedian in his own right. Ben's connections to Jim run deep. For starters, like Jim, Ben first came to the attention of a national audience on a TV show that ran on the Fox network, The Ben Stiller Show. A comedy variety show lasted less than a season in 1992, but it was enough time for the audiences to learn to love Ben's offbeat sense of humor and his ability to take on several different characters. Sound familiar? The personal connection began when Ben directed Jim in The Cable Guy. Ben later followed in Jim's footsteps by finding on-screen success in a Farrelly Brothers movie, There's Something About Mary. In that movie, Ben took big comedic risks. He battled with his zipper and lost. Then he fought a wild terrier and lost again. Just like Jim in Dumb and Dumber, Ben was able to remain so likable throughout Something About Mary that audiences cheered when he finally got the girl. After Something About Mary, Ben followed Jim's lead by taking on different kinds of parts, always keeping the audience guessing as to what his next move would be. His most visible role came in 2000 in the religious comedy Keeping the Faith, in which he played a rabbi whose mother and congregation wanted to marry him off. When many casting directors have noticed Jim's influence on Ben, this was never more true than in the case of Ben's latest pick, Meet the Parents. Ben is the man you see on screen as male nurse Greg Fokker, but the role was originally offered to Jim. Ben says it was easy for him to tell the script was originally written for Jim. The first draft I read must have been from when they were thinking of Jim because it was very physically oriented. Ben recalled in Entertainment Weekly, like the toilet's overflowing and my character sits on top of it and tries to stop it. He uses himself as a human plug. End quote. Mike Myers. Call it the Canadian connection. Like Jim, Saturday Night Live alum Mike Myers hails from the North County, Mike's hometown, in Scarborough, Ontario. Mike says that his dad fostered his love of comedy. Mr. Myers would wake Mike up at night to watch old Monty Python flying circus routines on TV. Mike got interested in showbiz early. He was working professionally by the age of 8, doing commercials for Pepsi and Kit Kat candy bars. Eventually, Mike's comedic talent helped him win a spot in Canada's Second City comedy troupe. Mike came to the attention of folks in the States as a member of the cast of Saturday Night Live from 1989 to 1994. Almost from the beginning, Mike's ability to create and sustain characters like Wayne, the host of Wayne's World, Dieter, the German talk show host, made him a standout in the cast. Like Jim, Mike has a unique ability to recall the things that made him laugh when he was a teenage boy. Does anyone remember Schwing and a lack of inhibitions when it comes to bringing more memories back to life? Mike's comic talent is probably best seen in Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery and Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, in which Mike plays off-the-wall characters like Dr. Evil, Fat Bastard, and Austin Powers with classic slapstick and incredibly gross craziness. Madonna jokingly thanked Mike for his sick sense of humor when she accepted an MTV Music Award for the video Beautiful Stranger. The video featured Madonna and Mike in his Austin Powers getup performing some moves in a car. Mike's next planned project is an undetermined film to be produced by DreamWorks, SKG, Imagine Films, and Universal Studios. I wonder what they're working on. Bet it's gonna be love. Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler is another Saturday Night Live alum. Like Jim, Adam got his start in stand-up comedy. In fact, he was doing his act in Boston when he came to the attention of Dennis Miller, who was doing the Weekend Update news routine on Saturday Night Live at the time. Besides being a featured performer, Adam quickly developed a reputation as a writer on Saturday Night Live. He took pains to keep his characters fresh and funny. He wasn't above doing gross out or dirty jokes, anything to get the audience laughing. After all, that's the whole point of being a comic. Adam borrowed a lot from his stand-up routine for Saturday Night Live. His act often included strange song lyrics, which Adam sang in a flat monotone. His hysterical Hanukkah song, in which he names all the Jewish entertainers he can think of, has become a holiday classic. Never let it be said that Adam Sandler has ever been particularly politically correct. What fun is that? Adam's first film, Billy Madison, set him off on a career that mirrored Jim's early days. The critics found the humor juvenile and totally dissed the film, but audiences ignored the critics. Adam went on to even bigger movie success with Happy Gilmore, The Wedding Singer, The Waterboy, and Big Daddy. Although he's never won the kind of critical acclaim that Jim finally achieved, industry insiders admit that Adam is a force to be reckoned with. His next release, Little Nicky, is almost universally predicted to be a huge hit. It stars Adam as a guy who's been asked by his dad to go into the family business, which would be alright except his dad is the devil. And in case you were in doubt about how much influence Jim's life has had on Adam, consider this. Jim's old pal and mentor Rodney Dangerfield plays Adam's grandfather in the movie. A huge hit. Jason Biggs. Jason is probably the youngest of today's comedians to follow in Jim's footsteps. He's 16 years younger than Jim, so Jason is one of today's top comic actors who might have grown up watching Jim Carrey movies. And it shows! Jason's most famous scene to date, his romance with the apple pie in Team Comedy American Pie, is a Carrey-worthy performance if ever there was one. Although gross-out comedy is definitely his forte, Jason didn't find his way into the comic world in a traditional manner. In fact, he started out playing it straight on the Broadway stage. His first role was in the serious play, Conversations with My Father, opposite Judd Hirsch. He then appeared in a soap opera, As the World Turns. Jason finally got to light up a little bit in the short-lived sitcom Drexel's Class. Since his American Pie days, Jason has gone on to stardom, acting opposite Freddie Prinze Jr. and taking on the title role in the summer 2000 Amy Heckerling flick Loser. Oh yeah, Loser. In that movie, Jason wears a doofy hat and an even doofier expression on his face. Yeah, classic Jason Biggs. It would be a direct take on Dumb and Dumber, except that Jason's character, Paul Tannick, is really smart. Jason's performance in the film is a comic tour de force that Jim Carrey would be proud of. Next up for Jason, Prozac Nation, starring Christina Ricci, and the title role in 2001's Saving Silverman. Also look forward to American Pie 2! I heard that one's going to be universally loved by everyone. End of chapter 19. Oh! Chapter 20! The Great Jim Carrey Quiz. Oh, God. Okay, so just how much do you know about the man behind the masks? Mask? You can find out just how much Jim Carrey trivia is stored up in your brain by taking this quiz. Some of the questions may take a little pet detective work as you search the pages of his book for the answers. Others are tougher than the Riddler's riddles. Only Jim's big fans, and Jim himself, of course, will get them right. No matter how tough the questions seem to you, you can be sure to find the right answers on page 106 and 07. Honest, the answers are there. You wouldn't call us a liar, would you? Oh. Number 1. Name the first comedy club Jim ever performed in. Yuk Yuk. Who is Whiplock? What the hell is a whip? Who's Whiplock? Jim's character in Earth Girls Are Easy. The Deadpool, which featured Jim as Johnny Shakes, was which of Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry films? A, third, B, fifth? Yes, it's fifth. 4. The cable guy likes to call himself Chip Douglas. The name is a reference to the middle child on what TV show? 3 Sons. What is the name of the fictional cartoon show on the Duck Factory? Dippy Duck. Who is Jane Carrey? His daughter. 7. True or false? Due to all the special effects, the masks cost $75 million to make. No, it only cost $20 million. Sorry, it only cost $20 million. Name the screaming comic who was Jim's mentor during his Sam Kinison. 9. Jim dated which famous rock star in the 70s? Oh, what was her name again? Linda something. 10. What is the mask's given name? Viking mask. What's the name of the character in the mask? Like, they didn't even know, I don't even think they saw that movie. What is the mask's given name? Stanley Ipkiss. He deserves better than that kind of question. Stanley Ipkiss is a hero. 11. Finish the name of the TV movie Jim starred in, doing time on Maple Drive. In Living Color ran on what network? Is it Fox? Yeah. On what soap opera did Lauren Holly appear? All My Children. Who is Ed Nigma? The Riddler! 15. The catchphrase "already then" first appeared in what Jim movie? These are like really dumb. It's Ace Ventura, idiots. 16. In which movie did Jim play a limo driver named Lloyd Christmas? Dumb and Dumber. Which cartoon character's theme song did Andy Kaufman perform in his act? Oh! Mighty Mouse? Which of Jim's character lives in Edge City? The Mask. Name the LA comedy club owned by Mitzi Shore, where Jim often performed his early 1980s. The Comedy Store? Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls, is supposedly set in Africa. Where was it actually filmed? Texas. Who originally had the role of the evil director, later played by Ed Harris, in The Truman Show? Wait, who? Dennis Hopper? Alright. 22. What 1941 Bob Hope film was the inspiration for Liar Liar? A. To Tell the Truth. B. Nothing But the Truth. C. Road to Morocco. It's B. 23. The cry "Somebody Stop Me Now" was first heard in which of Jim's movies? Somebody Stop Me Now? Yeah, The Mask. Is that a joke question? No. In Me, Myself, and Irene, what is the name of the nice guy cop personality? Hank or Charlie? 50-50 here, I'm gonna say Hank. No, I'm wrong, it's Charlie. Great. What color was the tuxedo jacket Jim wore in the premiere of Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls? What was the color of the tuxedo? White. I don't know. It was crimson. I should have known that. 26. What wish does Max make in Liar Liar? I'm not going to answer that. 27. Which team of brothers did Jim collaborate with on Dumb and Dumber and Me, Myself, and Irene? Farley brothers. Farley? Fairly. That's the question. How's it pronounced? Fairly? Farley? It's 2 R's. Farley. Chris Farley with 1 R. 28. Jim played the best friend of his real-life buddy Nicolas Cage in what movie? Peggy Sue Got Married. Which of Jim's characters has been described as a nasty, wasty skunk with a heart 3 sizes too small? My man, Truman Burbank. Where did Jim get the idea for the claw scene in Liar Liar? From a joke Percy Carey used to play on his children and grandchildren. It was a joke from his father. How did you rate? Anywhere between 25 and 30 correct? Wow, you did good. 15 to 24 correct? Alrighty then. This is a pretty good score. 18 to 14. Uh-oh, the Grinch has obviously stolen your VCR. You need to get it back and rent some Jim Carrey movies right away. Oh. 0 to 7. It seems that the cable guy has cut off your access to the outside world, but you can catch up. Reread this book immediately. Don't do that. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21. Keeping Jim in sight. The Grinch is coming, and that means Jim will have to go out on a major publicity blitz. He's already made his first Grinch pitch on the September 2000 MTV Video Music Awards. Pretty soon, his grinning face, green or otherwise, is going to be everywhere. So how can you be sure that you don't miss a single interview, article, magazine, photo spread featuring the wit, wisdom, and wackiness of Jim Carrey? The best way to keep track of Jim's comings and goings is to check out the Jim Carrey fan sites on the World Wide Web. On most of the sites, you'll find the latest news about Jim, as well as reprinted magazine, articles, sound bites, and even a few trivia games designed to test your Jim Carrey IQ. The trivia quiz in this book is a perfect practice round for your World Wide Web Jim Carrey challenge. There are plenty of chat sites dedicated to conversations just about Jim. Just remember to play it safe, and when you surf the net, never give your address, phone number, or real name to anyone you chat with over the internet. While you'd like to think that anyone who's a fan of Jim's is a friend of yours, the truth is, some of the people who log on to the internet chat sites are not who they claim to be. People that have known to log on to celebrity and teen-oriented sites just to lure in unsuspecting internet users. That's why it's so important never to agree to meet or call anyone you've been introduced to over the internet. In fact, the less personal information you give your fellow chat room visitors, the better. When searching the web, you can always find info about Jim, especially his official website. But if you're searching for all Jim all the time, here are some hot sites dedicated to the one, the only, Jim Carrey. For information, keep in mind the websites come and go. By the time you call it up, one or two of these sites may have disappeared from sight. But more Jim Carrey sites will surely pop up to take their place. Just keep checking the links to find out what they are. Alrighty then, here are the sites to search. There's literally... This is links. This is hyperlinks. And are they kidding me? Who wrote this? Can Jim Carrey in Espanol. Clubs.yahoo.com/clubs/ oh my god. Wesley's Jim Carrey's page. Member.aol.funny. Oh my god. Here we go. All Jim Carrey Haven. Jim Carrey Heaven. Jim Carrey the King. Jim Carrey the Legend. Jim Carrey the Museum. Jim Carrey the Genius. Jimmy the Genius. Maria's Jim Carrey's page. Moviething.com Jim Carrey a biography. Simone's Jim Carrey Corner. The unofficial Jim Carrey fan club. Carrey.com the Jim Carrey fan site. George's gigantic Jim Carrey page. Jim Carrey rocks. Jim Carrey.html. The Jim Carrey fan page. The Zone. Jim Carrey. The Jim Carrey Experience. The Jim Carrey Gallery. Jim Carrey World. Jim Carrey Spotlight. Jam! Movie artist. Jim Carrey. Absurd Jim Carrey site. Thankfully, the list does not go on. You can reach Jim even if you're not connected to the net. If you'd like to send him some snail mail, address your envelope to Jim Carrey at Nick Stevens United Talent Agency, 9650 Wilshire Boulevard, Suite 50, Beverly Hills, CA 90212. That is the end. Oh, we got something about the author. Who's Nancy? About the author. A little extra. Let's just keep going. I mean, why not? Nancy, what is your deal? She's the author of more than 100 books for children and young adults, including this one. And New York Times bestseller Taylor Hanson, Totally Taylor, and Leonardo DiCaprio, a biography. Leo, look out. You could be next. So watch out. Watch out. She has also written biographies of TV stars Frankie Muniz and Joshua Jackson, and hot pop singers Ricky Martin and JC Chazez. I don't know. Nancy lives in Manhattan with her husband, composer Daniel Burwasser, and their 2 children. Thank you, Nancy. Oh, God. Don't miss any of our best-selling pop music bios. Backstreet Boys, Aaron Carter. 5. Dancing with Hanson. Hanson Mbop to the top. Isaac Hanson, Totally Ike. Taylor Hanson, Totally Taylor. Zach Hanson, Totally Zach. Hanson the Ultimate Trivia Book. Jewel, Pieces of a Dream. Pop Quiz, Country Music. NSYNC, Tearing Up the Charts. Will Smith, Willpower. 98 Degrees, The Rising to the Top. NSYNC with JC, NSYNC with Justin. Don't miss a single play. Archway Paperbacks brings you the greatest games, teams, and players in sports by Bill Gutman, such as football, team, Bo Jackson, biography, Michael Jordan, all biography, revised, baseball super team, great quarterbacks of the NFL, Tiger Woods, all biography, Ken Griffey Jr., all biography, Brett Favre, all biography, Sam Sosa, a biography, Shaquille O'Neal, a biography, revised. Something printed on the back. TV, you can read your favorite shows on book. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Charmed, Dawson's Creek, and Roswell. The hottest stars, the best biographies. Matt Damon, a biography by Maxine Diamond and Harriet Hemings. That was interesting. Prince William, the boy who will be king. Second to none, superstars on the rise. Scott and Scott, the boys of Felicity. Ultimate boy band book. All right. Well, thank you for hanging around and for listening. This has been Fun and Funnier by Nancy Krulik, Jim Carrey's story. once that Grinch comes out, that Jim Carrey, boy, he's gonna be a household name. Look out this Christmas. The Grinch might just steal more than gifts. He might steal your heart. Again, this was for charity. Honestly, this is just to raise awareness for anti-depression, suicide, stuff like that. I still have a Movember going on, so hey, if you made it this far, if you want to donate, I'll leave a link to my Movember page. And also, again, inspired by the man himself, PewDiePie. Good luck, man. Subscribe to PewDiePie if you haven't. Again, his charity is Cry, helping kids in India. It's all for the kids. And also, Jake Lloyd, if you're still out there, have not heard from you yet, still got your baby. It's all yours, bro. Again, no hard feelings. Sorry about the whole Star Wars thing. Totally not cool. My bad. So, whatever you want, man, it's yours. Yeah. All right. Well, see y'all, I guess, next time. Peace out, y'all. Wow. All right. Well, I'm dead. I'm gonna go die. I'm gonna go die.
Oh, God. Oh. 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 Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, what? Where'd it go? Oh, my God. Dude. Oh, God. It's fucking brother. Game time.